Ladies and gentlemen, Rex Bear Leak Project, how the heck are you? The return of a binary star, the second sun. Yeah, you've probably heard about it before, but here's what's fascinating is our guest today on the Leak Project, Mr. Moore, Sheldon Moore, has been doing research in Vedic astrology, the star cycles. I had to hit the pause button there because I've got two screens pulling up, and research from around the world connecting not only higher levels of consciousness, but different cycles. He's going to share a presentation that he feels is convincing to show that there is a second sun. There is a cycle where it gets, to a certain point that might cause certain opportunities, not complete chaos. But he also says Nibiru, we're not going to see Nibiru for about 500 years, probably at least. And also Nibiru is in these ancient texts as well. Is that what you're saying? And thanks a lot for coming on the show, Sheldon. Really excited to speak with you. I've been agnostic toward Nibiru for a long time. I certainly think that there's a lot of other planets out there because they uncover all the time these new planets that orbit the sun, such as what would be one of them that does Sedona or something like that with the sea, and other ones as well. So you've got information that's pretty compelling then. And thanks for coming on the show. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. So before we get started into it, I've made a short presentation. Well, it's actually a fairly long presentation, but it's actually more than 500 years. It's about 10,000 years out. This object has a 24,000 year orbit cycle. So our binary is a 24,000 year period. And the only reason I'm talking about this is everybody knows about astronomy and how the universe affects consciousness. Like when you're born, depending on the place, the time you're born, the stars, the planets all affect subtle levels. They affect kind of who you are. But it goes to much greater detail than that, is that binary star systems affect consciousness as well. And if anybody knows about the Vedic Yuga cycles, there's a Satwa Yuga, which is a golden age. It goes down to Treta Yuga, which is still like a silver age, down to Dwapara Yuga, and then to Kali Yuga, which is a dark age. And it's a repeating pattern. It repeats and it repeats. And the only way for that to happen is in a binary star system. So these Yuga cycles, as the stars come together, you get higher consciousness. And as they go way out further, you get lower consciousness. And they all have different cycles. Some are like a 2 year before they reach perihelion. Some of them are 100,000 years before they reach perihelion. And this information is actually in the Laws of Manu, which is a Vedic document. And a great Kriya Yoga master by the name of Shri Yukteswar brought this forward to the world in about 1936. And most people didn't really pay attention to it. He's got some traction out there. There's some people talk about it. But I want to talk about it because it affects consciousness in a big way. But there's also more localized events that affect consciousness in an even greater way, and those are solar and lunar eclipses. Now, a lot of astronomers and astrologers already know that there's an effects with lunar and solar eclipses, but the effects are a lot more greater than a lot of people think. And by the end of this presentation, most people are going to understand how Stonehenge was used, how Göbekli Tepe was used, how the Nazca lines were used. We have these giant ground-based aeronautical calculators all around the globe that can be used for tracking eclipses, and they can be very accurate. For example, Stonehenge is 99.8% accurate in predicting lunar eclipses. And there's a reason for that. And hopefully by the end of this presentation, people will understand what the reason is. So I'll just upload the presentation now.
This is exciting.
So
buckle up, folks.
How do we attain Christ consciousness? I actually can't see you on the share screen, but anyway, how to attain Christ consciousness?
I'm here.
Okay. How to attain Christ consciousness? Now, I've just used that term because I realized you're from the Midwest, and I thought we're talking probably mostly to a North American audience, and they would understand what that means. But what does Christ consciousness mean?
The slides haven't shown up, though, just so you know.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, here we go.
Here come the gremlins, ladies and gentlemen. He's going to hit share screen, folks.
We'll try again here.
We even beta tested this earlier. It was working. So
remember I told you this is what happens?
Yeah. So folks will just, just give us a minute here while you're pulling that up. Yeah, it should just hit this. There we go. Will you just look at it, ladies and gentlemen? Now we're on Zoom.
Okay, but there's no share screen yet.
Okay, you had about 40 slides you wanted to share just a moment ago. You had them pulled up. People are getting in the room right now. Stand by, ladies and gentlemen. In case you don't have to buckle up quite yet. So you see the share screen, right? Down there on the bottom? Okay, you click that, and then it should give you your options like before. You've used Zoom. You know how to do it. Yeah,
but the presentation's not there now.
The presentation's not there. Unbelievable. Well,
this is not by accident, by the way. But anyway, we'll get it. We'll get it here in a sec. Just
yeah, that's fine. While you're pulling that up, no big deal. It's interesting too. While you're figuring that out, we've had guests on the show before that use Vedic star charts for life paths and stuff like that. But when you brought up the binary star system, the Christ consciousness, and the Buddha, and I think that's fascinating because right now I've even got Brady Shalley working on a piece for me. It's a 3-piece painting, like you can see behind me. These are 24 by 36 paintings. Well, she's doing a 3-piece set where I've got the Bhava Chakra in the center, and the Yama and the cycles and the destinies and stuff like that, and Buddha is associated with it. So that's pretty awesome. You find it yet? We get it?
No, we still haven't got it here.
So all you got to do is you got to pull up your presentation, right, on your computer.
Yeah, I'm gonna documents.
We've got 4,444,000 people watching the show right now, and they're all saying, "Will you just look at it? Will you just look at it?" And we are just looking at it, ladies and gentlemen. We're gonna get there. Just it's only been a minute. People are like, "Man, my time's valuable. I got to get back inside. I got TV to watch. You can't get this going, man." We're getting there. We're getting there. Gremlins like to come out once in a while. I'm sure a strange synchronicity with you guys while Sheldon's pulling that up. The other day, somebody said, Rex, if you look behind you, you're going to notice that there's a 9 and an 11 with the paintings. Because if you look at the Doom Worm, looks like a 9. And then if you look at the Thoth painting, you're going to see what looks like could be an 11, but it's actually 2 pillars and Thoths in between them. I thought that was interesting. How did that happen? Somebody said, man, Rex, shapeshifters.
Okay.
How's it going, Sheldon?
It's not going. I found the presentation, but...
Found the presentation. Okay. And it won't let you share the screen when you pull up the presentation.
No. Oh, boy. This is getting too much.
This is funny. People are saying they want their money back. You didn't pay anything, folks. They want their $2 back. Remember that? Was that film?
So I see you, but I can't get into share screen now. Do we have to go offline?
Make the screen bigger. Yeah, try and make the screen bigger and just hit share screen. Just right there on the bottom. You shouldn't have any problems pulling that up.
Can't even make it bigger.
Hey, everybody, come here often.
Can you see that now?
No. Nope. Okay, you turned your video off. All right.
Okay.
All right, folks. This is what we'll do because I know that you guys are really excited. I'm super excited. Sheldon has literally like 40 or 50 slides that he's put together over a very long period of time to make sure that they're spot on. And we've got a pretty big audience here, but I don't want them to have to wait too much longer, so we could beta test this and then just come back here in a few minutes if you want.
Okay, here, I got you on. Let's try it again.
Okay.
You got it now?
Yep. Ladies and gentlemen, if you waited this long, good for you, because good things come to those who wait. Having to wait that 3 minutes. I know it's a long time. I know you're just super tantalizing the information. You just want to get those synapses shooting. Here we go. How to attain Christ consciousness, Mr. Sheldon Moore, the man, the legend, the way of life. Let's rock and roll.
Okay, sorry about that. This all happens quite often when I bring this presentation up. So
it's hot.
We're gonna talk about how to attain Christ consciousness. Now that's the same thing as enlightenment. In Vedic terms, they call it moksha. Bodhi. It means it means all the same thing. It's basically shifting your consciousness. How do you get the halo? How do you become enlightened and have enlightened societies again? So I went on a kind of a 25, 30-year research about how can we have enlightenment everywhere again, because when I used to travel through Asia, I used to work in Asia for many years, and I'd go to monasteries and I'd see these pictures that you see on the screen with people with halos over their head. And you see the same thing in Vedic art, you see the same thing in Christian art. And what it represents is somebody who's enlightened, somebody who's shifted their consciousness, Christ consciousness, God consciousness, enlightenment. Doesn't matter, they're all the same terms, just describing the same thing. And in Tibetan, if you see down below there, you also see women with these halos. So this is not just a man thing. Women can attain enlightenment just as easy as a man can. And in Tibetan Buddhism, they call them taras. An enlightened woman is actually called a tara. And I still in firm belief that women are going to be a great change agent as we shift right now. Like, the world is changing. Everybody knows, probably why you're watching this presentation right now, is everybody's feeling a shift. Everybody's feeling something. Something's changed, not just that long ago, but there's a change happening. The sun is different. There's increased weather patterns. There's a change going on right now. Everybody knows that at the soul level that this is occurring. And hopefully by the end of this presentation, you'll understand exactly what is really occurring out there. So we have these avatars. And what is an avatar? An avatar is somebody who descends from a higher place, from a perfect state of Buddhi. So like Jesus was an avatar. Buddha was an avatar. Krishna was an avatar. Rama was an avatar. They descended from a higher world or from a higher place to come here to help us get unstuck. And they also have another name called an advhut. And we're all advhuts. We have the potential to reach the state of Bodhi, which is a perfect state of enlightenment, just like an avatar. And when the avatar descends to teach us how to reach this state, people will reach their own state of enlightenment, and they're at the same level then. There's no difference between you or an avatar at that point. And that's really why all of these great masters have come. And there's a lot of fluff out there now in the New Age community and stuff. And I think that we have to look back at a lot of these ancient teachings again, because the key, the elements were in there to help us all attain enlightenment. That's why all of these people have come, is to help us attain enlightenment. Now, I know religions form after these great masters come, and then it gets kind of silly. Like, you look at, like, there's 30,000 variants of Christianity, and you won't go into one church right now where they're teaching you how to attain Christ consciousness. They'll teach elements like love and kindness and all that stuff, which is important still, but none of them are actually telling you a technique on how you can shift your own Buddha nature or your own soul consciousness to achieve Christ consciousness. And that's really what Jesus was teaching as well, is how to attain this higher consciousness. And they all brought some form of Dharma or higher teachings. And in the case of Jesus, a lot of his teachings were really in the Gnostic teachings, the true teachings, and we kind of got the edited version. So when you look at the Gospels right now, they're heavily edited. A lot of them were removed. The Gospel of Mary Magdalene, the Divine Feminine, removed. The Gospel of Thomas, removed. All these Gnostic teachings removed. The teachings of Origen Adamadius, heavily censored by the Roman Empire. Rome did this. This is Rome trying to make it this heaven and hell stuff, put everybody in a place of fear and have control, rather than having everybody attain their own Christ consciousness, because that's really the last thing they want. And another important thing is Buddha taught that the only way to end cyclic existence, and this is the reincarnation cycle, we're all reincarnating. It doesn't matter what religion you believe or what your belief is, we are all reincarnating over and over and over again. And that's just a fact of life. Doesn't matter what you believe, that's a fact. And the only way to end this cyclic existence here on earth is to attain Christ consciousness. And that's what Buddha taught. The only way you can enter parinirvana and go back to God or further on your journey back to a higher world or wherever you're going to head next is you have to attain enlightenment on earth first. And it's not a prison planet. It's just wherever your consciousness is, you are on a planet that matches that vibration. Your vibration is on a planet that matches that. So if you want to continue on in your journey, you gotta go on and attain Christ consciousness and then enter peri-nirvana at the time of death. And it's not really death, it's just transition. And this lower bardo, because the first place everybody hits is the lower astral realm after they pass. And this lower astral realm, a lot of us get stuck. We spend almost as much time there as we do in corporeal form. And corporeal form basically means in a body. And a lot of Tibetan monks, for example, they can go through this lower astral in 49 days and go back to and reincarnate. And they also often tell their students where they're going to reincarnate. A lot of times they even leave the name of the parents, all the clues you need to find them, and they go out and find these guys where they find them where they're reincarnated again. And there's a great book that Padmasambhava wrote called the Tibetan Book of the Dead, and it was hidden for 700 years. He didn't want it to be found for 700 years because he was afraid the dark forces would get a hold of it and manipulate it. So he actually hid it. And then it was republished. It's called the Tibetan Book of the Living and the Dying by Sogyal Rinpoche. And that was just published in more recent times. And it's a roadmap of telling people how to cross through this bardo and move on in their soul journey. And, you know, King David even has that in the death prayer. As I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I'll fear no evil. He's telling you how to go through the lower astral, past all the archons and negative influences, your journey further up. So these dark forces, they love despair. They're the ones who create all this negativity on the planet. They influence us as well. And they're pretty easy to break free from that control if you don't live in fear. Fear is the biggest setback of all people, is the mind and the fear that the mind generates. And they play on that. So just remember, peri-nirvana is the only way to break free from this matrix, because it is a matrix. But it's not a prison. It's just part of the old cycle of the good and the dark. It's a cycle that exists probably throughout the multiverse. It's not just here on Earth.
Well, let me jump in on that note for a second, because, you know, once again, I'm thinking of the Bhava Chakra, and what you were describing is paralleling exactly that. So synchronicities abound. And when you bring up these teachers and these gurus that say, I'm going to be reincarnated here, it's like they're actually so in tune with the will of life and the will of karma that they can literally project their consciousness into, you know, the next birth or something like that. That's quite fascinating. And I want to jump to the for a moment, for those that are new onto the chat here, because just a whole bunch of people just showed up and they're probably wondering about some of this cyclical evidence for a binary star that you have uncovered with these Vedic teachings, these ancient teachings. Could you tell us a little bit about that and some of the return date possibilities? And I also want to throw out there that if there is a binary star, how far away would it have to be to cause cataclysms or damage to this planet?
I've got slides that'll cover all of that. They're just a few slides further down, so I'll cover everything.
Okay.
I've got diagrams fully mapped out, and I also put our history into that to show you how our history completely fits what this theory is.
Cool. All right. Yeah, let's just do it the way you're doing. It's perfect then. Don't need to jump the gun. Just wanted to make sure everybody didn't freak out, because, you know, people are in a hurry sometimes. No, we're good, guys. This is going to be a nice, like, you're going to do probably about 2 hours worth of slides. So kick back, relax, enjoy the information. And this is great. The audience is really saying good things thus far.
Have some popcorn, have a beer. I guess I shouldn't be telling people to have alcohol, but it's
if you're in the Northwest, now you're in the Northwest, right, Sheldon?
Yeah, I'm in British Columbia, central British Columbia.
Cool.
So all these masters came to teach us enlightenment, and I'll explain, because it's kind of hard to see it in Christianity sometimes, because religion forms after these great teachers come, and then things get a little bit goofy. In all of them, in every religion, you can see the rigidity of men, basically, and sort of the master's message was long lost or kind of marginalized. But Buddha taught very clearly the only way to end cyclic existence, the reincarnation cycle on planet Earth, is to attain enlightenment while you're here and enter final peri-nirvana at death. So when Buddha passed away, he went to peri-nirvana. He's never going to come back and have a body. He's never coming back to this earth again. He's finished. Some of these other masters, like Jesus, probably going to come back. They said they're going to come back. They probably will. But there's an important thing where Jesus said, no one can enter the kingdom of heaven unless he's born again of water and spirit. So baptism is not enough to enter the kingdom of heaven. Being excessive holy is not enough to enter the kingdom. You have to be born again of spirit. What does that mean? It means to shift that Buddha nature or your soul consciousness up to the crown chakra. And then you're born again in spirit. It's right there in the Gospels, right there in John. That's what he's talking about. And another really good one that blew me away is if you go to Matthew 6:22, he says, therefore that I be single. You know how the Hindus wear that dot in the forehead? The whole body shall be full of light. A lot of people think he's talking about activating the third eye, but it's really, that's not what he's talking about. He's talking more about not living in duality, because the mind is what likes to, this is good, this is bad, this is black, this is white. The mind's making all these distinctions, and until you can stop the mind and see the world with a single eye again, your whole body won't be full of light. Jesus is talking about filling your body full of light, because the spirit inside all of us, we all have a spirit, is already enlightened. It's just overshadowed by the mind. So if you can stop the mind and live in spirit again, your whole body shall be full of light. He's talking about enlightenment right there. So even though the Gospels have been heavily edited, they didn't edit them enough. And I hope someday we find all the Gnostic Gospels, because Gnosis is really enlightenment as well. So he was teaching the same thing. And Krishna, again, same thing. When the desires of the heart cease, the mortal becomes immortal and attains Brahman. Brahman means basically attain God consciousness, enlightenment. And he taught the only way to reach liberation and end suffering was by attaining moksha. And moksha is just another word for enlightenment or Christ consciousness. So all these masters were pretty much teaching the same thing. Our religions just get it mixed up. So I just want to talk a little quickly about the historical meaning of enlightenment. It's a state of liberation that can be attained by anybody here on earth. Now, it was a difficult journey in the past. Like Buddha went on a very hard path. Even Jesus, the 40 days, nights in the desert where, he was influenced by dark forces and stuff. There are forces out there that try to hold people back from attaining enlightenment. They also try to stop people from teaching other people from attaining enlightenment. All this information has been suppressed for a reason. But everybody has this potential. Everybody has the spirit inside that can awaken, and you can attain Christ consciousness. It's called moksha, gnosis, nirvana, awakening. The Tibetans call it rigpa, bodhi. They're all just terms to describe enlightenment. And here's the best right out of the Bhagavad Gita, how Krishna describes enlightenment. One who has inner happiness and inner joy and has found inner light, such a person, a yogi, has attained nirvana. He is one with the supreme and attains supreme. That's right out of the Bhagavad Gita. So he's talking about this perpetual bliss. That's one of the main things you'll experience when you have a shift of your own consciousness. You're blissful for the rest of your life. It doesn't go away. It's perpetual bliss. And all sentient beings have a potential, and I say sentient beings because I'm not just talking about humans. Any being with sentience can attain enlightenment. So there's planets out there with non-humans that are probably enlightened. And this inner life stream, because the Tibetans call it a life stream, because they don't really want you to think the soul as something separate as well, because everything is connected in the multiverse. And so seeing your soul as a separate self, you're back into that ego thing. And it's just a life stream on its eternal journey. And when you attain enlightenment, you're connected to the universal mind at that point. So that's what you experience Brahman because you're now connected to it at a spiritual level. And we all have that. And so the soul, the Buddha nature, the Atman are just terms to describe this inner God spark that we all have. And it's already fundamentally pure. It's already enlightened, and basically it's just overshadowed by our minds. Our minds think we're the center of us, and they really aren't. So the path to this liberation, and this is out of Vedic or Vedic, because you can say Vedic or Vedic, it doesn't really matter. It's the pronunciation is interchangeable. But there's the way it works, which is karma. So you perform right actions in life, you conform to a higher law of dharma, and eventually you might attain enlightenment that way. It's kind of a slow process though. Like if you want to attain enlightenment in one lifetime, you might not reach that state by just doing that. So they have jhana, which is the path to enlightenment. And this is where yoga and the meditation and all these other practices come into play. And that's also a way to accelerate your path to enlightenment, because you got to be doing something. You got to be doing something to stop your busy mind and your ego. And because the ego is just formed in the mind. It's just the mind trying to create an identity for itself. And you got to let the Buddha nature, the spirit, shine forth once again. And there's techniques on how to do that. And there's also bhakti, which is the path of love and worship. And I think this is why Buddha kind of went away from this traditional Hinduism, is even though the Bhagavad Gita and stuff like that was his source of foundation of knowledge, because it got a little bit too crazy. There was too much deity worship, and he saw that as an obstacle to enlightenment. And so that is a path that some people follow. The nice thing about that path is it's total love of God, and there's nothing wrong with that. You totally love God, and you that path is okay. But I say kind of combine a little bit of all three of those, and you'll get there a lot quicker. There's also Shaktipat, and that's where a master can kind of come along and touch you on the head. And what they do is they reset that Buddha nature through their own power. But you haven't earned that right. And it's more of an act of grace. They might recognize an old student that's stuck, and they just kind of gently help them get unstuck. But Shaktipat is not the best path. And there's a lot of people offering Shaktipat and pay me $5,000 and you'll get enlightenment. That's just the spiritual fluff out there. So I would avoid that one if you can. Do it on your own merit. And another important thing I want to get into this presentation is some past masters have left really important clues on how to attain enlightenment. And in Buddha's case, he followed a very extreme path of yogiism and for decades. And I know most Westerners aren't going to go out and sit in a cave and starve themselves and hardly eat anything to attain enlightenment. You know, we're kind of rush and we're just not going to follow that path. But he also, after he attained enlightenment, said this wasn't the path, because he almost died. But that's an important thing. He left as an important clue. His Buddha nature sank low. So he was really low before a reset happened, and it shifted. And there was another guy called Wei Neng, which was one of the famous Zen masters of China. It was more of a Chan master, but Chan is just Zen is just the translation of Chen in Japanese. And he was by far the greatest Zen master that ever lived. And when he became enlightened, he was just a young man. He was like 12 or 14 years old, and he was extremely fatigued from hauling wood. And there's another clue. His Buddha nature was low, and he heard one verse of a sutra, and it went so low that it flipped and came right up to the crown, and he instantly attained enlightenment. So I'm only telling you about these two examples is that they seem to reach a low point or just being really fatigued, and they attain enlightenment. But there's some other things missing here that we'll continue on with. So, and he also taught that excessive holiness is not the way, Wei Neng. He said the Buddha nature within, or the spirit, is fundamentally pure. That's your God spark. You don't have to sit in rigid and become a monk or do all these rigid meditations and all this stuff to kind of purify yourself. You're already pure. It's just the defilements are coming from your mind and our bodies, but the spirit is always pure. It's very hard to defile the spirit. We can if we're dirtbags lifetime after lifetime, but it's very hard to defile the spirit within. So it's kind of difficult to find the soul, because it's the God spark, and I'm almost foolish sitting here trying to explain something that's divine and comes from God, but it's important to kind of understand it, because you'll really understand the mechanics of enlightenment and what you need to do individually to attain Christ consciousness. And this inner light is in all sentient life. I really don't believe there's people on this planet without a soul. Even though there's some really dark people, they still have a soul. They're still kind of like a children of the Creator. And it's where pure consciousness resides. It's in your soul consciousness. And I know this for a fact, because the only reason I knew this 10 years ago. I basically sat on this teaching. I wrote a book called Remember Zen. I got it. I thought I would get enough copies out there, and in the future, enough people would find it long after I'm gone and find this teaching again. But at least it was was printed. So I didn't really go out and push this teaching or anything, but I had a near-death experience, a real one. Like I was flatlined, I was dead, and I left my body. I know I left my body, and I was going back to the great center, basically. And but my consciousness was still there. So the person giving you this presentation, the physical body wasn't there, and the mind wasn't there, but my consciousness was still there. So pure consciousness really resides in your soul, not your mind. The consciousness that you think that's in your mind, that's the illusion. The real consciousness is in your soul, and it's pure, and it's part of creation. It's part of God. It's eternal, and it can move in between dimensions. It's not just stuck in this dimension. When we die, we go to another dimension. And when you're enlightened, the Buddhists actually see enlightenment is that you're in a different bardo. You might be sitting here operating in the third dimension, but your consciousness is shifted to the extent where you're connected to everything, and you're technically in a different dimension, kind of. You're just sort of sitting here waiting out your time. But most of us get stuck in this reincarnation cycle until enlightenment occurs. And that's just part of spiritual evolution. And I think some of us came here to help, but we get stuck in the material world, getting a job, making money, getting a girl. All these things are just material things. They're not really what's important to the soul. They become important to our simple minds, but to the soul or the spirit, they're not important. And one of the most important things is you have to have a good connection with nature. Nature, for me, was a better guru than all the books I read, all the studying I did, all the practices I did, just living in nature. I live in a real beautiful farm. There's trees everywhere. Nature feeds the soul. So you need to breathe air to support your physical body. Your spirit within you needs prana. And prana is like the chi, the life force, the, what do they call it in Star Wars? Can't remember even the name. There you go. The soul, where does prana come from? It comes from like flowers, trees growing, the early morning sun. It comes from nature. So that's why you get those euphoric feelings when you're in a real beautiful place by waterfalls and you can smell that fresh pine trees, and that's prana. That's feeding your soul. So you're having a direct connection with nature is probably more important than finding a guru or anything else. Nature, nature, nature. I can't describe that enough. It's very, very important. And to shift this soul permanently is when enlightenment occurs. And I want to talk about how the soul is affected by these yuga cycles. And that's where I'll get into this dual binary star system, because the only way you can have a repeating yuga cycle is with a binary star system. And you know what? 70% of all the multiverse is binary stars. I think ours is. It's in Vedic texts. The Caltech researchers, I'll talk about that too, have pretty much come up that there's something big object out there. And it's why it's in our psyche, is because I think we're in a binary star system, and it's the real cause of the rising and falling of consciousness within the Vedic Yuga cycle. And a lot of ancient Vedic people knew this, but it kind of got lost. We just went through the Dark Age. We lost a lot in the Dark Age. And it's influence, the soul within us is influenced by magnetics and electrics. And that's what astrology and astronomy is all about, is how the soul is affected by the position of the stars and by the position of planets. But it's also affected by these binaries coming in and out. And more importantly, it's affected during eclipses. That's real local type of effects, because the magnetics and electrics, and these are more subtle, casual bodies that get affected by it. So science, just because science can't measure them and see them yet, doesn't mean they're not there. We all know that these things are there. We feel it. And there was a famous Canadian physicist, Albert Roy Davies, who actually did experiments on how human consciousness was affected by positive and magnetic fields. So under a positive magnetic field, humans acted more negatively, and under a negative one, it was the opposite. They acted more positively. And he's got documented research on this, that how the humans are affected by magnetics. And I don't think it's so much our physical bodies, it's that soul consciousness within us, that God spark, that's really being affected by these magnetics. So what is a soul without corporeal form? And this is an interesting thing. Can you see this picture that I got up here? With
Yeah, I want to jump in for a second if I can on this picture, because I'm looking at that will right there, and oftentimes Buddha in these, these paintings and these depictions of the Baba Chakra, he's pointing outside of the wheel of destinies. If you could make it out, well, guess what? He's pointing at the moon, or he's pointing at this right here. And so this is representing of the soul.
Yeah. So let's see if I can get my cursor over here. So if you see these two pictures over here, these are actually digital photography where these things appear. Now, sometimes it's just a speck of dust or a light or something like that that's causing these, but got an electronics background, and I can explain what's happening here. Is in the old days when you took a photograph and it was like just a film, it was basically a mirror image of what you're taking gets on the film, and you get 100% of what you just saw, basically. But with digital photography, that's not what really occurs. Is it actually goes into sampling, where if it was taking a picture of my hand, it takes a bit there and a bit there and a bit there, and then it recreates that image. So they're just tiny little digits. And what's happening with digital photography and why these things are showing up is that these things are oscillating. Like, these are basically humans without a body. So when you leave your corporeal form or your body, this is all you are, Rex. This is one of these God spark balls of light, whatever you want to call them. But most people haven't noticed this, and this is something that stood out with me right away, is in Tibetan, they have these things called Dharma wheels, and they call it the wheel of samsara. And this is the wheel that we keep reincarnating. We never get off the wheel of samsara until we attain enlightenment. So I find it quite interesting that you see all these ancient sites that have these wheels, and you see almost the exact same thing appearing in digital photography now in these, and these are souls. This is your Buddha nature. This is what sits at the base just below the navel. That's the soul seat. Most people think that their consciousness and who they are is what's in their mind, and it's not. It's your soul is down, unless you're enlightened, it's up here. But if you're not enlightened, it's the soul seats just below the navel. And that's why the Japanese, when they commit ritual suicide, harikari, they put the dagger right below the navel. They're going after the soul seat. They don't kill the soul, but they die from it, obviously. But that's where most people, basically, their soul consciousness resides. And the mind thinks it's the center of the universe of you, or the solar system of you. And it's the one with all the opinions, concepts, egos, everything else spinning and spinning and spinning. And the Buddha nature, your spirit, really doesn't shine forth. And if you don't think your soul's below your navel, just think for a minute when you had your heart broken sometime in your life. Everybody's gone through pain. You feel it right in the heart chakra, right dead center of your body, kind of right in here. You don't feel it in your head or your toe or anything. It's in this, because it's your soul weeping. It's your soul consciousness. Also, when you get scared, you tend to cover your stomach. You ever notice when you scare somebody, they go like that? They're protecting their soul consciousness. They're not protecting their head. They're kind of, because that's where they feel it. And the techniques of meditation is to move that consciousness up your chakra systems to your crown chakra, and that's where Christ consciousness presents itself. But it's quite interesting. If you see, it's even in the Indian flag, these Dharma wheels. So what's really seen here, and I can't really describe it much more than this, because I'd be an idiot thinking I can describe something from God now here, but I think that all these little dots you see in these photography is all your lifetimes, all your soul. So in your next lifetime, Rex, you're not going to remember your bank PIN number. You might not even remember your face, or what your soul's going to remember is the real soul-to-soul connections, the love connections you made, the important things. That's the information the soul retains. So some people have dreams and stuff, and they're from past lives. They're remembering things from the past life. But after you shift your consciousness and you attain enlightenment, you'll start remembering a lot of past life things. And we all have that ability. And it's somehow encoded in this liquid light ball that attaches to the lower chakra many months before we're born. And everything is there. And then when your body physically dies, that little orb goes on. And sometimes, in most people's case, it gets stuck in the lower bardo for far too long, because they don't know how to pass through that bardo at the time of death, because the planet's filled with religions that don't teach us that anymore. So we're kind of getting stuck in this, and it's not being stuck in hell. It's just, we're just stuck in the lower bardo, and it can kind of feel like hell, but we also kind of create hell on this planet just by our actions. So we all have to collectively lift our consciousness to see this golden age come, or to see this world change. And that's why enlightenment is so important. It's not a fluffy thing. It's not a made up thing. It's true. Everybody watching this has a potential to achieve Christ consciousness. And Jesus even said that. Buddha said that. It's everywhere. So I want to talk about Sri Yukteswar. This is this great Kriya Yoga master that really discovered both the binary system, and we'll talk, but he also talked about the 5 aura electricities of the causal body. Now, these aren't identified by modern science. He figured we're going to be in Treta Yuga before science catches up and figures this out. But it's quite interesting. He said an atom under the influence of chit, or universal knowledge, forms a calm state. So that's a development of the wisdom mind in Buddhism and a lot of different faiths, that you got to kind of develop your wisdom, not just knowledge, because you can borrow. Knowledge is just borrowed. Wisdom is something different than knowledge. It's something that your soul kind of takes hold of and is able to weigh things, think critically, and develop wisdom. But when you develop wisdom, the atoms in your body actually reach a calm state. And when these, when it's spiritualized, it's called buddhi, and that's where the term bodhicitta comes from. That means in Buddhism, the people want to quickly attain a state of enlightenment so they can help other people attain enlightenment and go on in their journey.
So when someone says that person has buddhi, it's not like saying they have, never mind, bad joke.
It's basically saying they're enlightened. They've reached Christ consciousness. The same thing.
Yeah. It was all right. Please continue. This is great. This is fascinating, man. This is amazing. I just had to throw out a pattern interrupt there real quick.
No worries. So, but it's also magnetized. So this ball of light that's in all of us actually has polarity. And so when they're under the influence of universal love, they produce this magnetic field. And this is why Jesus, Buddha, everybody, we're so focused on having loving hearts. You know, a lot of times when you see a lot of these Tibetan monks, Indian gurus, etc., you see very loving, kind, humble people. And it's because they've reached this state. Their Buddha nature has been magnetized. It's flipped polarity, and they're enlightened. And but they're very humble as well. You will never see a Buddhist monk say, "I'm enlightened." That's kind of a red flag in Buddhism, because it's kind of the ego, I'm enlightened. But sometimes you have to share some of these experiences because it might help other sentient beings. But be careful of people who are pretty quick to announce how enlightened they are and stuff like that, because it's most of these people are very humble. They're not. So I'll can you see this picture of this body now? Person standing in the body? Because that's the one that.
Yeah, okay. I can see it. And, you know, I just wanted to say also for folks that are listening, I mean, that was one of the things that prevented you from releasing this information previously, is because you just felt like it was, I mean, you kind of gave a little bit of a story to that. And I think it'd be neat if you shared a little bit of that, because that's fascinating.
Yeah. Well, I kind of sat on this for a long time, and there was a couple of reasons. This was back, I knew all of this back in 2008. So in 2008, I told you about, I started writing my book called Remember Zen. And about 4 days into it, I had a real problem about writing this book, because if you haven't changed your consciousness and you're trying to write a book about how other people can change their consciousness, it's like writing a cookbook and you've never cooked a meal yourself. But a friend of mine knew that I had researched for decades, and that they said, why don't you write a book? You know too much. You need to write a book. So I sat down and started writing this book. And about 3 days into it, I was really tired. You remember I told you about exhaustion and reaching a low point. And I was at the point in my book, how was I going to describe the interplay between the mind, the body, and the Buddha nature, or the spirit? And I even had soup cans on the table trying to figure out how I was going to describe this in the book. So I stayed up late. I was very tired, and I went to bed about 4 o'clock one morning. And I just fell asleep, and I was having this dream that this meteor was coming. And it was weird because it started off in a dream, and I jumped out of bed and I looked out my window. And this is on February 19th, 2008. Anybody can research it. Everybody in the Pacific Northwest that was awake at that time saw this meteor, because it wasn't like a normal meteor. It was brilliant colors. It eclipsed the pre-dawn sky. It was so bright when it, I guess, went through the atmosphere. It was green, orange. It was the freakiest thing I've ever saw. It was really bizarre. And the very next morning, I had to go to town to get dog food. And I heard on the radio there's going to be a blood moon that night, a total lunar eclipse. And I thought, I have to watch this lunar eclipse. There's something, because I knew the ancient Tibetan and Chinese astrologers, when there's two celestial events back to back like that, it means something. So I thought, I got to watch this eclipse tonight. So I went out and watched this eclipse. And I say this very humbly, my consciousness changed. And I went to perpetual bliss, from sort of dumbass to perpetual bliss. And I knew my teaching was complete at this point. And so I knew my book went from, it was going to be this thick of a book, and it went totally changed the book. I had to go back and change things because I wasn't a blind man leading other blind men off a cliff anymore. I knew I had to capture this. But the interesting thing was, I thought, well, I've got to put this in a Buddhist context, because most of my wisdom had come from Vedic and Buddhist research. And when I started researching this stuff, Buddha knew about it. It wasn't in his normal teachings. It was in the Kalachakra Tantra. And then when I started looking even further back, every one of our arithmetical ground calculators, which are these megalithic sites all around the world, Stonehenge, Göbekli Tepe, the Nazca lines, guess what? They're all designed for predicting lunar eclipses. They can do other things, but they can all accurately predict lunar eclipses. So I thought, there's got to be a connection here. And the reason I sat on it for so long was, you imagine, I don't know if anybody who's watching this back in 2009, imagine going on to a so-called light worker site and trying to tell them they still have to do work to attain enlightenment, and this is what they have to do. I had one person respond to me that the Galactic Federation of Light were coming in with light beds, and we would just have to lay down on this thing and we'd all become enlightened, and they were bringing money and everything, first contact was imminent. The cabals all being arrested, all this crazy stuff. And it was just so deep into this fluff and channeling and all this stuff. I just backed away. I just thought to myself, there's a reason this was been hidden. The reason Buddha didn't teach it openly, there's a reason a lot of these Kriya Yoga masters didn't teach this openly. And maybe I should just sit on it, write a book. Hopefully it gets enough copies out there that in the future people would find this and they would know, because I really felt people weren't ready for this yet. And in some ways, people still aren't ready for all of this. This is a lot of information that we're going to be given in 2 hours. And so that's why I kind of sat on it. And it wasn't until I had a near-death experience, and it's documented. It's not, anybody can check my near-death experience. It really occurred. And when I left my body, I was going back, and I almost got back to the source, and I was told to come back and teach. So that's why I started going around and teaching this, because I was actually told to come back and teach. So what do you do when something like that, I'm not making this up. This really happened. And so that's why I started bringing this forward. It's kind of a difficult thing to do, though. You get a lot of shills, and a lot of people don't understand this. But I think if you really watch this and listen, not with your mind, but listen with your soul, listen to this with your soul, and the right people will understand this message. So before we're born, these little orbs of light here enter the body, and the soul seat is just below the navel. So it attaches, and you can see they have polarity. Now, everybody hears about the 7 chakras, and you can't operate on somebody and see a chakra, but they follow the central nervous system, which the Vedics call the Shushanam region. So they follow our central nervous system. And when the soul enters the body, it's really what powers up these chakras. They all correlate with an organ too. So like the third eye is the pineal gland. A lot of people think that enlightenment presents at the pineal gland. That is incorrect. It presents at the crown chakra, which is tied to the thalamus. A big misconception there, but you can open the third eye and increase your sort of clairvoyant type of capabilities and stuff. But true enlightenment is at the very top here at the crown chakra. So our spirit, our Buddha nature, whatever you Atman, whatever you want to call it, sits at the base of the spine, basically, right below the navel. And these other 7 causal bodies that form are, and you've heard of them, etheric, emotional, astral body, and right up to the nirvanic body. They're basically just powered by this inner light. So we're not just a physical body. And if anybody's ever experienced an astral dream or astral traveling where you're look down at your body, you still have a body when you're out of your body, but look at your hands and stuff. It's not your physical body anymore. You've got a body still, it's just not your physical body. And we must shift this position here to reach this crown chakra. And this is the real key, is that this is influenced by magnetics and electrics. And so when you're born, it's influenced by the position of the planets and the stars and the constellations. Those are very subtle levels, though. Anybody at the spirit level can rise above being a Libra or Scorpio or whatever star sign or whatever you are. But it's also affected by these binary star systems, which are the yuga cycles. So that affects consciousness because that's electric too. These 2 stars, our sun and its binary, are electric. They affect soul consciousness, and that's why we have this yuga cycle. It's repeating. There's no other way to have a repeating yuga cycle other than this. A lot of people, new age people, say we've entered a new age of space, we've entered a new band. That's not correct. We've just got closer and we've entered Dwarpa Yuga. We're not in the dark age anymore.
Describe this to us real quick, if you would, Sheldon, the yuga cycle, what that means, and why you have to have a binary star to make it work.
Okay. It's maybe I'll just wait till I get to the slide, because then it's visual. It's only like 2 slides away.
Okay. Yeah.
So
No.
now, do you see that? I'll go back again.
Ladies and gentlemen, we just look at it.
Here's the key. Now, you see that this Buddha nature has to rise up, and you can move your consciousness. You can do it right now, Rex. You can just say, I'm going to move my soul consciousness to here, or I'm going to move it to here. You can actually move your consciousness around your body. And this is why some of these techniques like Kriya Yoga are so important to learn, because, when Jesus said, keep your spirits up, keep your spirits up. You see,
okay.
There's more meaning to this stuff than we think.
Okay.
We have these down, but there's a key to this. Watch this orb. It goes low before it goes high. So in Buddha's case, he was fatigued. He was almost dead. He practiced his extreme yogism. He sat under a tree, the Bodhi tree, on a full moon night, and he became enlightened. But it wasn't just a full moon. It was a lunar eclipse. And we'll explain that a little bit later. So it must go below and then go up. So you can be doing all kinds of techniques trying to pull it up and nothing happens, because it actually has to go low. And that's something that all the Kriya Yoga, everybody's missing that point. And it must also flip polarities. So you actually have to go low, be able to consciously, not with your mind, but with your spirit, flip it, and it'll come up straight up to the crown chakra. And this is Christ consciousness. This is God consciousness. This is enlightenment. You now have an expanded consciousness. You're connected to everything now. And that's why enlightened people kind of know things more than other people. And they're not better. You're not better because you're enlightened, but you're now connected to the Akashic records or chakra, whatever. You're connected to the cosmic mind of one now. You have an expanded consciousness. You will live in bliss the rest of your life. You will experience joy. If somebody kicks you in the shins, you're still going to say, ow. You might even get angry. It doesn't mean all your emotions are gone, but your bliss will be perpetual. It'll never end. And the most important thing is, after you pass over, you can go on past this earth. You can leave this earth then. And that's why all these masters have come to teach us this, so that we can all leave and go on. Some of us might go back to higher worlds. I don't think we really need to rush out of this planet now, though, because I'll explain when we get into the Yuga cycles next. We've entered a good part of space now in the Yuga cycle, and every day gets better. We're on the ascending arc. As those binaries come back together, consciousness rises and rises and rises until you reach a golden age, and then it falls out as those stars go out. So some people ask about a rainbow body, and that's when highly realized monks or just normal people they can radiate this rainbow body at the time of death. And really what it is when the physical body self-liberates into the non-material body, you'll actually see when Jesus said, therefore the eye be single, the whole body shall be full of light. It's basically that master is releasing that light. He's going into his material body, and people around will actually, there's documented cases of actually witnessing this. And you see this red robe monk guy up in the corner? That's Wei Neng. That guy sitting there is outside. He died in 1800 AD. So he died, 1,200 years ago? And that's his body. It hasn't rotted. It hasn't decomposed. They put new robes on him every few years. But this guy's basically, I don't know if he's covered, but he's sat out in the rain for hundreds of years. His body, because when he left his body, he was an enlightened master. And his body just crystallized and basically self-preserved itself. And this guy still sits in China. You can go to a monastery in China and see that body sitting there after 1,200 years. Anybody else would be just dust. He's just sitting there. It's, and another one.
And how long has he been there?
Well, he was 800 AD. So we're 2000 now. So 1,200 years.
Wow.
He's the greatest Zen master that ever lived. He even wrote the Platform Sutra. So he was the only Chinese Buddhist that actually has a dedicated sutra.
I need to make a comment on that. And somebody was asking, recently there's like, why are they putting so much formaldehyde in vaccines and in different foods? And why are they putting all these different, genetically modified E. coli feces and spraying genetically modified viruses on meats and stuff? I said, it's because when, 1,000 years from now, your body is going to have so much formaldehyde in it. It's going to be so encased in chemicals that it's not going to rot. So folks, you're not going to have to meditate. You just need to eat extra food at the Dirty Clown. And I did it again, Sheldon. I'm sorry. No, that's incredible, man. That's fascinating. Although I'd be kind of spooked out if people were messing with my body, 1,200 years from now. They'd be like, let's take that DNA and put it in a virtual reality box and then genetically print him on that 3D printer and make him do work for us.
Yeah.
That would suck. But this is off the hook.
Yeah. So, and another good example is the Tibetan master called Jezong Kappa. He was 1,300 to 1,400 AD. So he still goes back 700 years, 600 years. And he was the first guru of the first Dalai Lama, Jayendra. And he founded the Yellow Hat sect in Buddhism. And he was actually prophesized by Buddha. When Buddha was approached in the forest one day, a young boy gave him a rosary beads, which is a kind of an expensive gift to give. And Ananda, which was the chief disciple of Buddha, saw that Buddha was kind of troubled when this boy came and gave him this. And he said, what went on there? And Buddha said, in the future, this boy will do the deeds of a Buddha in the land of the snows. So he gave a long walker, which is basically a guy who can walk a long ways, gave him a conch shell, a white conch shell, but it's a left-hand turn. Those are the sacred ones. So if a conch shell has that left-hand turn, and you also see Krishna always holding the conch shell, and if you see pictures of Krishna, and he gave him this conch shell and told him to walk to this certain mountain in the land of the snows. So this would have been like a couple months journey, like very, very dangerous journey to walk all the way from India to Tibet. So this guy went, and monk long walker went to the land of the snows, Tibet, and buried this conch shell. Well, you fast forward, because Buddha was 500 BC. So you fast forward to 1300 AD, almost 2,000 years, 1,800 and a half years, this guy's born called Jezong Kappa, and he's teaching the Dharma. He's a major Buddhist reformer in Tibet, one of the top 3 gurus that ever lived in Tibet. And when he went to build Ganden Monastery, which is a monastery probably 50 kilometers out of Lhasa, Tibet, how when they build a new building, he dug the shovel in the ground to sort of commemorate the new monastery. And guess what? He dug up this conch shell. It's a true story. It's known on the Hindu side and the Vedic side, our Buddhist side, that this occurred. And this was this guy. And he withheld final nirvana because in that time, most monks never reached final enlightenment until they did the Vajra practice, which included sex with a consort, somebody who's experienced in helping shift that Buddha nature. And he never did that because he took the vows. So he didn't attain the rainbow body until his time of death. And he emanated this rainbow light. He's probably one of the best examples of of somebody at the moment of death, radiating the rainbow body. It can also happen without dying, but these are all documented cases. This stuff really happened. And that's why it's just the non-material body, or sorry, the physical body liberating into the non-material body. So this yuga cycle that we're going to talk about now assists in soul growth and spiritual evolution. The whole multiverse, that's why probably 70% of all stars in the multiverse are binary. You know, and I know a lot of Christians think anything outside of this planet's dark, all alien life forms are dark. It's not true. There's the good, the bad, and the really bad out in the multiverse. And this tug of war between the light and dark is kind of a natural thing. So even though we just came through a dark age and we got this whole horrible history in our past, often caused by man again, there was soul growth there. There was spiritual evolution there. It's part of evolution of consciousness. So it's not just as, oh God, what have the Illuminati done to us and stuff. It's a natural balance between the light and the dark. And you see these yin and yang symbols up here?
Oh, yeah.
I believe, now this is not documented, I believe that the yin and yang is really representing our dual binary sun system, our star system. And so as those stars go further out, consciousness falls as they come in. So you see the magnetics around each one of those stars, as they come closer, they increase. The magnetics and electrics increases, and it's affecting our souls, our consciousness. So consciousness gets greater as they come together. But when they come right together, you get a quick cataclysm, and then they go back out, and consciousness slowly falls again. That's the yuga cycle. I've got another slide that it'll explain it even a little bit better. So the soul must really reach this state of enlightenment before it can go to the next bardo. And that's what all these masters came and taught us. And we're all on this journey back to source. We're all on spiritual journeys. It's and so the attainment of these 8+ cities, and cities are just attainment. So like if you remember all your past lives in great clarity, you've attained a city. So you're only enlightened to this extent you've developed these cities. And even developing the wisdom mind is basically the development of a city. So there's more than 8, but when you develop them, you are free from ignorance because you've developed a wisdom mind. You gain knowledge, and then eventually you experience bliss when you actually shift your nature. So this tug of war between the forces of light and dark, as you see in this picture up here, is a natural occurrence. But we're not so much in a dark zone anymore. So I also believe that these ancient Vedic teachings were influenced by aliens, extraterrestrials. Now, I believe they came in the last golden age because they were trying to teach us enlightenment and good things. They weren't like the Anunnaki who were after gold. They weren't like a lot of what you see with grays and reptilians and negative things. These guys who came in the last golden age were concerned about our spiritual evolution. If you read the Bhagavad Gita, if you go back to the Ramayana, Rama was 5,000 BC, 5,000 BC. Krishna was 3,000 BC. This is a long time ago. And so if you see this bigger conch here, this is the binary star system coming in and out every 24,000 years, every 20, and then there's bigger cycles. And what's interesting, why I think that these people, that they were potentially not of this planet, is these Vedic astronomers were monitoring extremely long cycles. And in our history, the oldest race on this planet is Australian Aborigines. They figure they're 80,000 years old now. And they don't have a recorded history this long. The Vedic teachers don't have they only go back as far as Rama, basically, which is 5,000 BC. Yet these people are monitoring 4.32 billion year, which is a kalpa, which is just one breath of God, just a flash of time, means nothing. And the Maha Yuga, which was the traditional cycle of the Yuga cycles, was 4.32 million years. You show me any documentation where Hindus or people from India were recording time at those lengths, and they weren't. And another interesting one is if you study Krishna, his celestial abode, Vaikuntha, actually gives the coordinates in Capricorn and which star and the distance in yogans to this star. Where did they get that from? And the most important one is they also have a Manu, and a Manu, we're going to talk about the laws of Manu, which includes this whole dual star theory. It was written in about 200 BC, but it goes back potentially thousands of years before that, because a lot of this stuff was recorded after it was shared for thousands of years before somebody actually sat down and wrote it. But a Manu, which is the celestial king, has a ruling period of 300 million years, 309 million years. That's a long time. And why I know that this has got to have an extra exopolitics component to it is in the Vedas, they mention Vimanas, which are UFOs basically. And there was 4 types of Vimanas mentioned. 2 were for intercontinental flight or within a continent. 1 was for intercontinental flight, so like flying between North America and Africa. And 1 was for interplanetary flight. So here we go, and Rama came up from the inner earth on a Vimana. There was Vimanas in the time of Krishna, these flying machines that could go between planets. And to add to the story is Rama had light green skin and Krishna had light blue skin. Their skin was different colors. There's a bigger connection here. We were helped, I believe, in the last golden age by good extraterrestrial races, the ones that you want to meet, and they were helping us to attain an enlightenment and give us these advanced teachings, because nobody can measure these cycles. Nobody, just imagine how long it would take to measure a Mahayuga 4 and record it and say, at this time you're in a golden age and at this time you're in a dark age, and be able to record that, because you have to see it repeating 5 or 6 times before you recognize a pattern. It just doesn't make sense. So it had to come from somewhere else. I really believe that this came from somewhere else. And I don't really believe it. I know it, but
I gotta jump in on this note real quick also, because I had an interview yesterday with Daryl Sims, and he has been abducted by extraterrestrials. He talks about his experiences, his family experience. He was military police. He worked for the CIA for a couple of years and got out, but he helps people with their experience as well, find out what they've gone through. And he talked about these blue beings, like these mid-level beings. And I'm even thinking of the miniseries Taken, which Steven Spielberg came out with many years ago, and there are these blue beings. But after watching that TV series and then interviewing Daryl, I said, Daryl, what you're describing to me sounds like something out of that TV series. He said, well, where do you think they got the idea? And, he was probably joking, but at the same time, truth and humor. And I wonder, like you just said, these extraterrestrial beings, these different colors and depictions, and what you see in these ancient paintings with these giant blue beings and different colored beings. And some of them have these very fascinating headdresses and stuff that I think of when you see the Book of the Dead and the Egyptian pharaohs and the way that they're sitting, and the stuff like the feng shui type thing. It's almost like there's an underlying theme. And I think they're using it for technology more than just looks back in the day. And then the later cultures were trying to mimic what they saw from possibly these ETs or interdimensionals, or, whatever you want to call them. So this is incredible. And I like this. And let me ask you this too, before we move out too much further about let's go back to the binary star for a minute, if we can. And you talk about the cycles and how it goes further out and then it gets closer, and the further out it goes, I guess kind of more chaos ensues. The closer it gets, more enlightened is kind of what I was getting from you. Is it getting closer now? Is it moving closer? Is it moving further out?
You got it. We're on the ascending arc now. So we're ascending. So the next slide will show it, I think. The next 2 slides will go completely through this. So this is where a lot of traditional Vedic researchers might argue with me, because right now they believe that a yuga, the 4 yuga cycles, are in a Mahayuga, which is 4.32 million years. So in that cycle, what happens is you get a dark age. The Kali Yuga is the dark age. So it's a 4:3:2:1 ratio. So Kali Yuga, the dark age, is 1/4 of a golden age. So most of the time is a golden age. And then you go into what's basically like a silver age, Treta Yuga, which lasts 1.266 million years. And then you get into Dwarpa Yuga that lasts 864,000 years. And this is where Shirak Tishwar said this too, that in the last dark age, We lost our history. We lost all these teachings that I'm giving you right now. We lost everything because we tend to reach our lowest in a dark age, because when we're in the dark age, the Kali Yuga, mental virtues at 25%. When you're in a golden age, mental virtues at 100%. It's at 75% in Treta Yuga, and it's at 50% in Dwapara Yuga. And why this doesn't work is, you got to be kind of a sort of a detailed researcher and have some critical thinking abilities. Is they measured the position of the planets and the stars when Rama was born, and he passed in 5115 BC. They know that. They know when Rama was here, and they know Krishna was here in 3100 BC. 3102, that's when Krishna passed. Now, they know also, they say in the Vedic that Rama came in Treta Yuga, right? And there's only 2,000 year difference between Rama and Krishna ushered in the Kali Yuga. So it's impossible, because there's 864,000 years in this old model. So it's impossible for Rama to be here in 5000 BC, and only 2,000 years later, Krishna is ushering in the Kali Yuga right at Dwapara Yuga. It doesn't work. It doesn't matter how smart you think you are as a Vedic researcher. The old model doesn't work. And it's for a reason, is we lose everything. And I think a lot of this mix up is by design. I don't think we just lost this in the dark age because we became brutes and we're stupid for 2,000 years. We lost, some of this stuff's been lost by design. It's just like the Kalachakra Tantra. We only have fragments of it. So Shirak Tushwar, this is Shirak Tushwar here, an amazing Kriya Yoga master. This guy, and he passed in I don't like to say die, because these guys don't die, they're timeless. He passed in 1936, so he was contemporary. He was the guru of Yogananda. Everybody knows who Yogananda is. He's the guy that told Yogananda to come to the West to teach the West. So Yogananda kind of set the foundation in the Western world and brought the Kriya Yoga to the Western world. Very important people, both of these guys. And I think he sent them to the West because I believe that the Great Awakening is going to happen here on Turtle Island. It's not going to start in India this time. It's not going to be in Tibet. It's here on Turtle Island. Turtle Island is North America. The Great Awakening is going to start in North America. The people are incarnating here now, are going to help. Even though we're very much caught up in the material world in the West, and we have a lot of stupidity still, I really believe the Great Awakening is going to happen in North America, and that's why Yogananda was sent here by this master. And he formulated a non-traditional view of these yuga cycles, and he determined the almanacs were wrong, and he was a very competent astronomer. And he said that we do not have 432,000 years of Kali Yuga left, or 427, because most Vedics believe that the Kali Yuga, the Dark Age, started when Krishna departed. It might have felt like that for his disciples, but they think that we have 427,000 years of the Dark Age still to go. Now, if that was the case, you might as well shut down your show, Rex. I might as well turn off this presentation now. It's just not the case. We don't have we're out of the Dark Age. And I'll explain to you how this guy was right. And I know he was right. And he calculated, he did a measurement that we're in the Sandus period of Dwapara Yuga. So it's basically divided into these two arcs. And so the Laws of Manu, which is this document was basically 200 AD to 200 BC when it was written, but it goes back a lot further than this. And it says that our sun rotates around a dual sun every 24,000 years. Now, I know with supercomputers, we've now calculated that the precession of the equinox is 25,620 years, and I've seen 25,918 years, kind of 25,000 years, but I think he still might be closer to the truth, because if you look at my finger, when the binaries come together, they tend to speed up and then they slow down when they go out and they speed up. So the mathematical modeling our scientists have done with this on the precession of the equinox is wrong. And I think we really are closer to 24,000 years. And he said that there's two arcs. There's a descending arc, and then there's an ascending arc. And that's where we're at. We've left the Dark Age and we went into Dwapara Yuga. And that's really what happened in 2012 is mental virtue went from 25. It would have been a bit higher because there's a buffer zone between these yuga cycles called a Sandus period, and they range from 200 to 400 years. So you get overlap, but we're clearly completely out of the dark age now. We're entering, and that's the effects everybody's feeling. That's why people are saying we've entered this new region of space. We haven't. Our two suns are coming back together now. We're on the ascending arc. Every day gets better for the next 10,000 years, because this sun doesn't come back for another 10,000 years. So I'll make a commitment here today. You know, I've heard a lot of shills say, you know, we're going to see Nibiru last fall, and it's going to come in for the kill shot in March, this March, a month away. I'll eat a plate of horse dung if anybody watching this sees Nibiru, and we all see it in the next 10 years. We're not going to see Nibiru, our dual sun, for a long time. And I know that. They don't have to believe it. Everybody, you know, a lot of people like the doom. We're going to continue seeing lens flare. And the reason why we're seeing these storms and increased activity is we went right out of the dark age into mental virtue, went from 25 to 50%. That's a major jump. That's the biggest jump we'll ever experience. It's basically 100% change. And that's why everybody's searching. That's why everybody's watching stuff like this, is the change is happening now. It's up to us individually to attain enlightenment now and help change the world. We can't just all sit on our hands and you know, the powers that's rubbish. The powers that they're still in control. We have to gain back our own control, our own destiny on this planet. And the best thing you can do is don't get pulled down on all this negative stuff, because it is negative. There's bad things happening. This is just all not just fluff and the world's perfect. I don't want to paint that picture, but it's more important to focus on your individual enlightenment, change your own consciousness, because then you're connected to the universal consciousness and you'll help this world change a lot faster. It's really important that we all do that. So there's two 12,000-year electric cycles of ascending and descending arcs in this. So he's talking about the electric universe before that even became popular. We are an electric universe, and our souls are affected by the stars and the constellations, and we're also affected by this these two dual stars coming in and out. That's what's creating the rising and falling of consciousness. And the next slide will really show this in a better way. But when the suns are the furthest point away, mental virtue is at its lowest point, because the electrics, the magnetics of those two charged plasma spheres, because that's all the sun is, and our twin is probably a brown dwarf, maybe a red dwarf, it still has an enormous amount of energy and electrical energy, and they affect each other. And that's why, you know, I don't know if you've noticed, Rex, but the sun is brighter now than it used to be when I was a kid. It's changed because mental virtue, we've went full on in Dwarpa Yuga, and that's the jump that we're all experiencing. And this comes out of the laws of Manu. This guy Shirik Tushar just didn't make this up. This was in their ancient documents. And to even be able to monitor a 24,000-year cycle had to come from somewhere else, because the Hindus haven't been recording history this long. No matter what some guru wants to say, they just haven't been. None of us have been. And so where did it come from? And I think it came from these blue races, these whoever Krishna and Rama were connected to. They taught us this when we were in our last golden age, because our consciousness was high enough. And we don't get taught this in the dark age. That's where archons and negative things come in, because we're in a dark age. You know, we drew a lot of this negativity onto this planet ourselves with our dark thoughts and our horrible deeds. It's not just, you know, we're not just victims here. We're responsible for a lot of this ourselves, especially men. You know, it's and that's why when you go into a golden age, you go back to the feminine. So every day we're going back to a more feminine type of, you know, and this doesn't mean we all have to buy purses and handbags and wear high heel shoes. It's just the energy, the feminine energy is going to be stronger now. And that's a good thing. That's not a bad thing. Masculine energy needs to take a break for a couple thousand years. And so this is what you were asking for. So this is right out of my book, Remember Zen. I wrote, the multiverse is a precision timepiece of the creator.
Sheldon, Can I jump in real quick on your book? Because there's a lot of people. We've got about 1,000 people watching the podcast right now. Can they get your book on your website, on Amazon? How do they get access to your work?
Okay. I don't have a website. I'm really low key. Like this is kind of out of my comfort zone. I don't. It's on Amazon. You can type in Remember Zen. So it's easy to remember. Just Remember Zen. That's the name of the book. And the reason I call it Remember Zen is when I went out to watch that eclipse, I remembered the technique I needed to do. I wasn't taught Kriya Yoga. It's the reason I keep mentioning Kriya Yoga is it was what I was doing was the closest thing to it was Kriya Yoga. I wasn't never formally taught. I can teach people Kriya Yoga. I have a slight modified version and I haven't really documented my full teaching. But if you buy that book, it will give you everything you need to do to take the evolution of your own consciousness into your own hands. And you probably won't even have to seek out a guru. Sorry, I got a cat here trying to jump on the computer.
Hey, no problem. Yeah, so I'll just make sure I get a link on that so I can put it in the, that'd be great.
I'll send you the link. But it is on Amazon and you just type in Remember Zen and you'll find it. And I tried to price the e-version, the electronic version at $1.08 because the 108 is a sacred number in Buddhism, but they wouldn't let me. When you're in Canada, Amazon has a limit, so I think it's $3 or something like that. But it's the cheapest I could put it at was at that price. So it'll cost you roughly you can get it for cheaper than you can get a cup of coffee at Starbucks, basically.
Yeah, you could get like 4 of them for a Starbucks coffee. I found the link. I'm putting it in the video description box. I'm going to put it in the live chat here. So thank you.
Okay, so this is what's happening. And I wrote this in the book. The multiverse is a precision timepiece of the Creator designed for the evolution of all consciousness, not just human consciousness, all consciousness. So when you really look at this and you change your own consciousness, you know God a lot more. And the whole universe is an amazing thing that this actually is occurring, and it's occurring for the evolution of our consciousness. So we're not really on a prison planet. It's pretty dark. It has been dark, but we're on the ascending arc now, and I'll explain how that works. So on the top diagram here, we're in a dark age when the 2 suns, so our sun and planet X, are the furthest apart. That's when mental virtues at 25%. We're in a dark age. Now, that occurred in 500 AD. So Jesus came in just before we reached our very lowest point on this planet. He was an important avatar. And it really makes me angry that modern churches have lost so much of his deeper teachings. And if you're a Christian, I hope this brings some comfort to you. Study the Gnostic teachings. Read the book of Thomas, and kind of what you're learning here, you will see that Jesus was teaching a lot more than modern churches have been telling us. And that's the Roman Empire. They created that. And you know what the Roman Empire became, which church they became. They suppressed this information, the deeper meaning behind his teachings. And there's also a guy called Origen Adamanius who started the first Coptic Egyptian church. And he was teaching that Jesus didn't become divine until after he attained enlightenment. And all the stuff you see in Buddhism is in his teachings. But if you go to his teachings, you won't find that because the Roman Catholic Church or the Roman Empire caught him, tortured him, and he died 2 years later from being tortured by them because they wanted him to recant his higher consciousness stuff. You got to go back to this heaven and hell rubbish because there is no hell. You know, if you're a dark soul, you'll be on a planet that's dark, or but the creator of this universe does not throw you eternally into a hell to burn in the hellfire forever. That's a trick by you know who. They're called archons, whatever you want to call them, negative forces. The Tibetans call them mountain spirits. You know, this man, Jesus, was teaching more as well. So I hope that people kind of look at that with a sort of a broader prospect, or sort of broader mind when they look at that. So our top of our dark age was 500 AD. And guess what? Right at 500 AD, you would think, what happened on this planet? That was the end of the Roman Empire. It went underground. It was hidden after that. But the main fall of the Roman Empire happened exactly around 500 AD. And then the European Dark Age, we'll explain that a little bit later, but that happened after about 600 AD to about 1700 AD. And I'm going to show you on the next diagram how our history fits that model that Shirkteshwar and the laws of Manu proposed. Our history fits that. It doesn't fit the traditional Mahayuga or any of the other thing that religions are trying to push down our throats. It fits that model exactly. And then so when these two suns come back together, like on the bottom here, that's when you have a golden age. And that's the seat of Brahma, the seat of God. That's when you have a golden age. And we were last at that at 11,500 BC. And guess what? 11,500 BC was roughly the time Atlantis sank. 11,500 BC, probably roughly the time we had an ice age. I also think, because the laws of Manu, if you read the laws of Manu, it's basically Noah. They're talking about Noah, but it's much more detailed than what you get in the Old Testament. The Manu and Noah are the same person, same being. And I think the time of Noah was roughly that time, because when those two suns come together, you're right in the height of a golden age, but it's 5,000 years on each side of that arc. So you get almost a 10,000 year golden age. These suns, when they come together, that's just a short period of chaos, maybe 10, 15 years where you could potentially get a pole shift. All this chaos that everybody's talking about happens at that time. And the other interesting thing is this Göbekli Tepe, this ancient megalith that they found in Turkey that was buried by small stones. So whoever built this Stonehenge type megalithic structure in Turkey, they buried it about this time. And I think it was our ancient civilizations, knowing that the duel was coming in, we need to preserve this site for future generations. Let's bury it. And they buried it. It was buried by small stones. It would have taken 1,000 people probably a decade to bury this site, and they did. It was buried. And I think it was to protect it. When this duel came back in, there was probably a pole shift. So when you get a partial pole shift, where the North and South Pole used to be are somewhere warm, so you get a quick melt and the sea level rises. And then where the new poles are, snow starts to form, you start getting ice caps, and then the sea levels decrease. And that's probably roughly the time Noah happened. It's the time that this Göbekli Tepe was built. And Göbekli Tepe, guess what? Can predict eclipses. And I'll show you how they predicted eclipses. And I've written all these researchers that are researching this site. Only one of them kind of got what I was saying. Most of them are just like, as soon as you tell them, blue-skinned guys flying Vimanas might have come and helped build these sites, you get put in the crazy category, right? Because that kind of sounds crazy to a scientific researcher. And I understand that that's cool, but I really think that these sites were made to preserve in the future so that we would be able to figure them out again. And hopefully by the end of this presentation, people will understand that what these sites were really for.
So they were really kind of keeping track of the planets and the alignments for thousands of years. Thousands of years,
yeah. And then just to give some perspective of some modern research, it was only less than a decade ago, these two Caltech researchers discovered a ninth planet with a strange elongated orbit, just like a binary has. Interesting thing, they claim it's 10 times the size of Earth. Now, these guys didn't look through a telescope and find this. How they found it was way beyond the Kuiper belt. They were monitoring orbits of other objects. You know how there's other objects that they monitor, and they know. And these different, there was like about, I think, 9 different objects, and they all had different orbits, different speeds, but they were all pointing in the same direction as space. So in traditional, people thought that our precession of the equinox was caused by the moon going around the Earth, and it causes that wobble every 24 or 25,000 years, slight wobble, right? Well, these guys saw that there was something else out there way beyond Pluto that was affecting the orbits of all these other objects, and they were all pointing to the same region of space. So they used mathematic modeling to determine that this thing has 10 times the mass of Earth, so it's big. It's not a small object. And what is an object 10 times the mass of Earth that far out for? Because normally heavier objects are closer to the sun, but this thing's way out there. And guess what? Got a 10,000 to 20,000 year orbit. This is modern science with mathematics saying the same thing. And they haven't admitted that this is a binary yet. We're probably going to see it at some point, 10,000 years from now, because the next slide will show that we're still a ways off before our dual sun comes back. But it's in the human psyche. We all probably were, a lot of us were incarnating on this planet way back then, and it's in our psyche. And I think a lot of people try to bring fear and stuff around this, because it's back to keeping everybody down. When everybody's in the doom state of mind, the Earth's going to end tomorrow, life's terrible, the Illuminati is treating us bad, they're meaners. You know, we are all in the wrong space. Nobody's going to find enlightenment when you're worrying about the material world and the weight of the world's on your shoulders. It's by design. They're doing all this stuff by design. And a lot of these channelers, I don't care what anybody says, they're not talking to higher worlds, they're talking to archons, and they're being misled. That's why, you know, I'll say it right now, channeling has a terrible track record. There's been so many wrong channelings out there, and everybody has that ability to channel. And as we get closer to the golden age, you and I'll probably be able to talk without actually moving our lips, you know. You know, it would be Clario audio or whatever. But
oh, I can do that now, Sheldon.
What's that?
I said I can do that now.
Wear the Martian mask again.
Yeah.
That was funny. Sorry, but that was a funny episode I watched. It was I enjoyed that immensely.
It keeps me sane. It keeps me from going crazier. I should put it that way.
Yeah, well, if we do another interview, maybe you can wear that again. That'll make me laugh throughout the whole thing. So this is Shirik Tushra's model. I've already talked to the fellowship. We're allowed to use this. They're very excited that I'm giving this presentation and talking about this.
Oh, fantastic.
So this is the model, and I'm going to show you now how our history fits this model very, very like a tight-fitting glove. So the nearest point, the last time we were at the nearest point was 11,500 BC. So when those two suns came back together was 11,500 BC. Now that's the time they built Göbekli Tepe, 11,000 BC to 12,000 BC. They believe this was built. And then you have a descending arc. So as these two objects start coming together, you can see that this whole golden age. See, you get almost over a 9,000 year period of a golden age, and this is when the cataclysms and the problems occur. But it's right at the height of the golden age. So Atlantis sunk during our last golden age, and it wasn't all these channelers saying, you know, the Pleiadians zapped us or some reptilians sunk Atlantis, whatever. I think Atlantis sunk during when these two stars came together, 11,500 BC. And at the same time, Göbekli Tepe was made, and it was buried, small stone. So why would they do that? Why would they build a megalith like Stonehenge, but it's even more refined than Stonehenge, and then bury it? And I think they knew the duel was coming, because whoever these blue-skinned people were, I think they're the ones who really taught us this, because we don't have a recorded history to even record 24,000 years, less Mahayuga of 4.32 million years. So this obviously came from somewhere else. So as we go down this descending arc, we leave the golden age, we go to Treta Yuga, and guess what? We know that Rama was born in Treta Yuga. Remember I talked about Rama and Krishna? Rama came in 5,000 BC in Treta Yuga. Guess what? Rama fits Treta Yuga here. And then we have Krishna, who came in 3,000, or he passed in 3102 BC. And Krishna was in Dwapara Yuga. Guess what? It fits. And then we go down further, and we have this device like called Stonehenge. And they think Stonehenge was 2000 BC. But now they're saying that it's probably older, because, you know, somebody can build one of these sites, and 3,000 or 2,000 years later, people come and hang around it and practice or do whatever they're doing around this site. They leave a fire and some bones or something like that, and we dig it up and go, oh, it's 2000 BC. But that site, it's kind of like the pyramids. I think the pyramids are way older than we think they are. So a lot of times we're digging up remains that might be after the site had been there for thousands of years. So like carbon dating of remains around these sites isn't very accurate. And the other interesting thing about the Mayan calendar start date, and this is important, the Mayan calendar start date was 3114 BC. Now, the Mayan civilization never started till 400 to 600 AD. That's when the Mayan, so why do they have a calendar that goes 3,000 years back in time? And it's only 12 years difference from the time of Krishna. And these are I think that these people flew all over the world and built these sites, Göbekli Tepe, Stonehenge. We got one in Alberta called Omak. These things exist in Armenia. They found Stonehenges in Egypt. Helena and Nicholas Roerich, which were kind of Russian spiritualists, they saw them in Tibet and Mongolia. And when they asked the monks, what are these things for? They just said the ancients put them there. That's the answer they got. The ancients put them there. The ancients put those sites there for spiritual purposes, and we'll get into that a little bit more later.
Let me ask you one quick question, if I can too, Sheldon, because you were bringing up a minute ago, somebody asked this question. I was thinking the same thing. Why do you feel that they buried it and it wasn't a natural cataclysm or some type of disaster that caused it to be?
Because I'll show you a picture of the site. They're just small stones. So they were placed there. So the site's perfectly intact with these small stones all around the whole site. It was completely buried. 10,000 years is not enough time for a bunch of stones to start gathering and covering a site. You know what I mean? It was buried. It was actually physically buried by the people that built it. It was buried. It wasn't, I know 10,000 years is a long time, but it's not long enough. If it was covered in sand or something like that, that could happen in a desert, like the one in Egypt got covered with sand a little bit. But it definitely was buried by small stones, and they were put there. You can just tell by the way they're placed. It wasn't some cataclysm. If it was a cataclysm like a pole shift, those pillars would have been knocked over and it would have looked different. It was completely intact, but just buried.
Okay. Yeah, I appreciate you explaining that. Thank you.
Yeah. So the reason I'm talking about this, the Mayan calendar starting thousands of years before their civilization, was I think there's a connection between Krishna and the Mayan calendar. And the reason why is the Mayan calendar is a 5,124 year calendar. And this site that looks like a medicine wheel, but it's not a medicine wheel, out in Alberta, has a 5,000 year calendar as well. And I asked the main researcher, the guy was brilliant that was researching this, thought way outside the box compared to everybody else. He says it's a 5,000 plus or minus 200 year calendar. So here we got something called Omak out in the prairies of Alberta that has an exact 5,000 year calendar. The Mayan calendar is 5,000 years. I think that really the 2012, the ancients were telling us that we're going to be fully leaving the Kali Yuga in 2012, and consciousness is going to start changing very rapidly. And that's why everybody's seeing this veil lift. Like the veil is being lifted right now, slowly, and there's still a lot of negative things going on, but mental virtue went from 25 to 50%. And I know a lot of people go, well, the Mayans, they did sacrificing and stuff like that. Sacrificing and all those type of things. But if you look on this calendar again, as you get down to exactly right about here is when we entered the Dark Age. You see, we go from Dwapara Yuga into the Kali Yuga, the Dark Age. So our Dark Age started roughly, about 700 BC is when our Dark Age started. And Shirak Twishar said we left the Dark Age in 1700 AD. And guess what? If you look at history, right around 1700 AD, we had the Age of Enlightenment in Europe, like when guys like Voltaire and people like that started appearing. It wasn't the type of enlightenment I'm talking about, but they sort of broke away from the control of the Roman Catholic Church and of the church and started thinking bigger, started accepting science, and they weren't as suppressed as much. And that happened right when we left the Dark Age. And so this whole period here is when we were at our worst. And right at 500 AD, that's when the stars were the furthest apart. And right at 500 AD was the collapse of the Roman Empire. It didn't really collapse. It just went more secretive, but they lost their landmass and their, they controlled all of around the Mediterranean and right up into London, England. Like the Roman Empire was a pretty big empire until about 500 AD, and it collapsed right at this point. Because then we start going on the ascending arc, because now the stars start coming back together again. So every day on the ascending arc gets better. Every day as we tick along this arc now, things are going to get better. And remember I told you there's a Sandis period between the Yuga cycles? So it lasts about 200 to 300 years. Guess what? You add 300 years to 1700, you get to 2000, 2012. That's what the Mayans were telling us. That's when I think the OMAC calendar was trying to tell us the same thing, that our ancients were telling us, guys, roughly 2012, you're going to leave the Sandis period of the Kali Yuga, Dwapara Yuga, and be full on into Dwapara Yuga. Mental virtue goes to 50%. From 25 to 50%, that's significant. That's a big jump. And every day as we go up on this scale now is going to get better. Like every day gets better on the ascending arc until we hit Treta Yuga. Things are going to be fabulous if we don't destroy the planet. And then when we get into the golden age in 7700 AD, things are going to be real good. But guess what? The twin doesn't return until 12,500 AD. We still got 10,000 years before this binary comes back. It's got a 24,000 year orbit. And the reason I think everybody's wrong about this is out of scripture. This comes from people who were teaching us higher consciousness. And our history fits this model. Like I took this model and mapped our history into it, and it fits exactly to this model. And this model also helps with the teaching I'm going to share now with how do we actually shift our consciousness, because our Buddha nature, our spirits are being affected by these binary stars coming in, but they're also affected by the constellations and the position of the planets. And they're really affected, the soul, the Buddha nature is really affected during eclipses, especially lunar eclipses. Now,
let me jump in on that, because you're saying that the mind's going to go from like 25% to 50%. And when I go outside, most of the people that I see, not all of them, a lot of people listen to Leak Project, I would say are 50% or above, but most people I would say are about maybe 4%, 6%. Like if you're lucky, they're literally like, consume, and I don't, oh yes, 5% discount, flu shot, fluoride, formaldehyde, I gotta have it for a discount, it's free. People are just, they need their phone now to go to the bathroom. They have to have their phone to go to the bathroom now, that smartphone, that smart appliance that's going to do everything for them. I hope you're right, but is it like, where's the balance here? Maybe there's that few percent, but overall I don't see it, man. I think it's people are actually losing intelligence.
You're absolutely right. And the reason for it is the people who are in control of this world are purposely keeping us down with their TV programming, trying to keep us in the material world. So it's kind of the bigger thinkers that are starting to feel this and starting to change now. But there's a lag effect, because as long as they keep the matrix going and keep the BS going, the people who aren't thinking higher thoughts and stuff are going to keep, that's where you're seeing 4 or 6%, that might even be generous. But probably a lot of your viewers, people that are interested in this kind of stuff, they're the ones who are going to change first. So it's still important for them to become enlightened, because one enlightened person changes the world. So if there's 1,000 enlightened people, it really changes the world. If there's 1 million enlightened people, it's really going to change the world. So we need to have better teachings, deeper understanding, and hopefully we can bring these people who are at 4% and stuff up. We can bring their consciousness up. It might just slowly happen naturally, but it also has to happen with more information. They got to, and their souls have to want to do this. And I really think that if you look at this model here, where they talk about in Western astrology, where we go from the age of Pisces to the age of Aquarius, the Gnostics called it a mega point, and that's where things just change. And I think it could be like a dimensional change where we actually go from the third to fourth. That's some point in our future. Don't know exactly, but on this model, nobody knows that date or that hour. It's going to happen, and I think when that happens, maybe some of the people who don't raise their conscious just won't be here, or they live out their lives, they die, whatever.
I actually know the answer to that. I do have the answer to that. And I think it's important because there are people out there that just don't want to wake up. And, you know, hey, there's going to be a new opportunity, a DNA farm. You will actually have an opportunity to be a hard drive that will store information, the virtual reality system, you know, all the different digital currencies. They need more power. They need more processing power. And currently technology, they can take 215 billion bits, no, 215 billion megabits of information and store it in 1 gram of DNA. So folks out there, 3-4% brain, that's okay. There's a new job for you. They're going to plug you into the machine. They're going to take your DNA. They're just going to store all that information in there. And then that way they don't need to build machines in China. You are it. You're it. And then the people that are smart enough, they'll just use you as a, you'll be the icon for what to look forward to when you don't want to wake up. It's right there. There's your opportunity. You can just be a DNA hard drive for the machine. Yeah.
And I know a lot of people, they kind of get disappointed when they realize that this golden age just didn't fall on our laps overnight. And because it doesn't, it's a cycle. It takes time. And I think you're going to have these laggards. You're still going to see ugliness because we just come out of the dark age. We're just into Dwapara Yuga now. And even though the electrics of our solar system is right, a lot of people just aren't going to catch up yet because they're still getting bombarded by darkness. The archons haven't left yet. Just because we went into Dwapara Yuga doesn't mean the negative forces on this planet are just going to mystically disappear. They're going to try really hard now to keep us down. And they might even go to like a scorched earth policy, because I really believe that things like archons and stuff, they didn't exist up here. They literally couldn't be on this planet when we were up in this zone here. And as we fall, they sort of start to come in. They start creating their chaos. We get into a dark age. And, you know, I did some research from this period here to this period here. We had 2014 major wars. Major wars, like some of them back in here, like the Persian and the Chinese wars, where 700,000 people were dying on the battlefield in literally a couple months, like major wars. We had an ugly period through this. This is where the archons have been. This is where all the negative influence. We were at our worst. We're slowly coming out of it. The veil is slowly being lifted, but it's not going to happen overnight. So all these channelers that say we're just going to go pop into the golden age, I don't think they're right. I think that, and they, you know, they're basically, their history and their forecasts have all been failing terribly. So I think it takes time, but I think it's very important not to get caught up in the despair, because I tell people this all the time, hope does rise. And I'm not selling hopium, but when you are hopeful and you're really practicing to lift your consciousness and you're operating within the world with a loving heart, you help change the world. Our thoughts manifest. Our thoughts, our collective thoughts manifest the world we're in. So when we start buying into all this doom and gloom and archons and, you know, what the Illuminati are doing and what the Cabal's doing, we get pulled down, and we tend to start drinking that Kool-Aid, and we just kind of give up. I hear people all the time, I just want to die and leave this planet. And we're all doing the wrong things. Have some hope. You by the end of this presentation, you're going to be able to take the evolution of your own consciousness into your own hands and actually become enlightened in one lifetime, if you want to. You know, you still have to do some work. You still have to do the practices. But when you know that it's not just technique anymore, but it's also timing to attain enlightenment, it's going to take decades. You don't have to go sit in a cave in Tibet for 20 years now to become illumined or enlightened. You can do it much sooner. And that's the only reason I'm giving this teaching, because I know this will help other sentient beings awaken. And our history fits this model.
I'm sorry. I thought you were stopping there for a second. I didn't mean to interrupt you there.
No, that's okay.
I was going to say, I'm still fascinated with that connection that you brought up to Planet 9. I thought that, I come up with some great conspiracies, but that one right there, man, that's a beautiful conspiracy. And I say that in the kindest way because we can't prove it without a shadow of a doubt yet that it's a binary star, or if we can, we don't have this information. We can
Yeah.
take the ancient history, we can take the dots that have been connected, we can also take the data that Mr. Brown has presented. He says, look, there is a planetary body that's outside of the Kuiper belt that's about 9 times the size of the planet that is actually affecting the sun. It's affecting the planets in the solar system, and it's that far out. So when you bring up the possibility of it being a binary star, and you think of the as above, so below, the yin, the yang, it's probably a much denser star. It's probably a dark star, like David Bowie was presenting in the song before he moved on up to the next level or wherever he's at now, man. But talk about dark star. I am
the black hole sun.
I've been so agnostic about the binary star, but when you brought that possibility up, I'm really considering there could be a binary star, and that's it. But here's the deal: it may be 10,000 years out, like you said. But if it's as far out as it is right now and it's cause and effects, what's it going to be doing 100 years from now, 50 years from now, 1,000 years from now? I don't think it's going to take 10,000 years. And when you go back and you read through the ancient stanzas from the Book of Zion, which is some ancient Vedic stuff as well. It predates the Vedic stuff, and Blavatsky translated it and put it in the Secret Doctrine. She talks, and you can read about this stuff in the Gnostic text, the Sumerian text as well, but I think that they copied from this, where it describes the solar system before the stars, before the planets, and it describes the creation of the planets. And then you can hear about how Venus kind of came in at one point, and how the stars shook up and how the planet shook up. And so if this star is getting closer, what could it be bringing in with it? And with all the other planets that we're discovering and the stuff that they bring in, maybe this chemtrail phenomena, another reason for it, because we know for a fact that the poles are moving, and they've moved quite a bit over the past 7 years, the magnetic poles. And maybe they're trying to prevent, if there is a pole shift, Freudian, if there's a pole shift, then the ozone will be depleted to up to 95% without some type of protective field. Maybe there's another formula in play where they're trying to prevent radiation poisoning from the ionizing radiation, not from like uranium, because they like to give people uranium. They think that that's a good thing, and Fukushima and plutonium, they think that's good for people. But maybe for some reason they're trying to prevent the earth from being scorched. And if 95% of the ozone disappears, then what about all the plants and the animals and the people are going to have to go underground? And they've probably done that in the past.
I think the universe is there. The multiverse has protection mechanisms. Like, I think when these two suns eventually do come together, because it was the furthest point here at 500 AD. We're now at 2000 AD, and so we're roughly 1,500 years out. It's still, and it's a 12,000 year arc. So it's 10,500 years away. If it is a red dwarf, they would only be able to see it with infrared. It would be way out there still. So they're probably not going to find it with a telescope. I bet you they don't see it with telescopes until we're around this time period. It's a ways out yet. And the nice thing though, is every day gets a little bit better. And I think that what we're seeing now with these people who haven't lifted their consciousness yet is they're just pulled down by the material world still. They're just caught up, like, it's very easy to be a religious fanatic and believe some of what these religions try to preach, and I think that all of this doom and gloom that we're just constantly bombarded with is kind of by design a little bit, just to keep us down, so don't fall for that anymore. Like, it's not perfect. It's not just all hopium, but have hope, focus on your individual enlightenment, and change the world by that. Like, that's the best thing we can. What else can we really do, right? Like, I think we have to stop being wimps too, and maybe some of us are going to have to put on, grab a sword and grab our warrior spirit and help take this down. What's going on? I think we might get to that point at some time, because I don't think they're going to go away easily. The people who control the world and have been controlling the world for a long time, that has to be deconstructed, and it's gonna take some courage and sorry to say, but some balls to do that, to take it down. So it's not just all this love and light stuff that you see with channelers and stuff. We have to stand up to the world too, to change it. But I think enlightenment is still the most important thing. Raise your consciousness, keep your spirits up. Like that was all taught to us for a reason.
Well, and we all need to remember they just love us so much. I mean, they definitely love us, the powers that be, the dungeon masters. They certainly have our best interest at heart. And I meant to say Black Star by David Bowie. Black Star by David Bowie.
Yeah. And they also call it the black hole sun, like it's, I think there's a song about that too, but
Chris Cornell. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Very fascinating. Somebody actually sent me a couple of shirts that he custom did with Chris Cornell and a coffee mug. So I want to give just, perfect time to give him a thank you. jamesdeweaver.com.au. He might even have a few of these shirts left and a few of these coffee mugs left. And he also did this really cool Leak Project Darth Vader shirt. So you should check that out. Just check his website out. Real nice guy. I always like to help artists. It seems like they never get enough. But yeah, Black Hole Sun, Black Star. What did they know?
So I was going to go to the full screen again, but I'm scared to shut it down because you know what? We'll probably won't find the presentation again, and you know how that works. So I'm going to try to show everybody this. This is where my teaching comes in now. And so what I got here is 3 balls on a rope. Looks kind of simple, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, I don't know if anybody's ever read about the key of David in the Old Testament, where it says, a key that can unlock one door and open it so it can never again be closed. I always thought, well, what does that really mean? Maybe it's not just a physical key, like a key. Maybe it's a celestial key. So this is our solar system. I can explain the entire human condition and how you can shift your Buddha nature on with these 3 balls on a rope. So the sun, our sun, call this the sun mind, call this your earth body, and call this your moon spirit. Does that make sense? So our mind is we all live a mind identified existence. The mind thinks it's the center of you, and it just spins all the time. It creates concepts. It's where the ego comes from. It's always thinking this, thinking that, judging. It never stops. It just spins and spins and spins with desires, material things, all this 4 and 6% people you identified. The reason they're stuck in that is because they're living in their minds. They don't acknowledge their spirits fully yet. It's just mind, mind, mind. Now the mind is always spinning, and it uses the earth body for cheap pleasure, the senses, the 5 senses, whether it's sex, eating great food, whatever, it gains pleasure from the body. And the lowly moon spirit, your Buddha nature, is deep down in your physical body. So if this is your mind and that's your body, the spirit is down right below the navel, stuck there, and the mind just spins and spins. So we're stuck in this perpetual eclipse of ignorance where the mind's just spinning and spinning and spinning, and the spirit is never revealed. We kind of slightly live in spirit, but it's never fully revealed, and it's in a perpetual eclipse of ignorance. It's overshadowed by the body. It's deepeth in the body, and what really has to happen is the mind has to stop. That's what meditation is all about. If you're doing meditation and it's not stopping your mind and removing the effects from the body, your Buddha nature is never going to be revealed. So the mind has to stop. But what the biggest mistake most Westerners make is they try to stop the mind with the mind. And that's not meditation. That's a paradox. You can't control your mind with your mind. And this is the key. When you go out and watch a lunar eclipse and you're ready to shift your consciousness and become Christ conscious, your mind has to stop. And that's a difficult thing for most people. You can't go out and watch an eclipse and try to push your Buddha nature down so you can do a reset. The Buddha nature must sink below that crown chakra, and it comes right up to the top of your head at the crown chakra, and enlightenment presents. And this is when I was told you earlier before we got online that I was using 3 soup cans on a table trying to figure out how is it going to explain the interplay between the mind, body, and spirit. For enlightenment to present, they have to be in proper synchronicity. So we're kind of all not in full synchronicity because our spirits are down at the lower chakra below the navel, our soul, and that's where real consciousness resides. And our minds take over our lives, and we think everything we are is in our mind, and it's not. It's our spirit that has to be revealed. So the mind at some point has to stop. It's just like a computer, a fast computer with a bunch of software going out of control all the time with desires, with whatever the mind's trying to grasp. It has to stop. And it's not just meditation that allows the mind to stop. I've developed a technique, and I write about it in my book, is having crystal clear awareness in nature. If you can just zen out in nature and stop your mind naturally when you're walking, you don't have to sit in a rigid lotus position and all that stuff. You just have to learn to let it stop naturally. And nature is very important. Most of these gurus that I've talked about, they all had a great connection and they lived in nature. So you have to be spending more time in nature with your meditations. You have to learn to stop your mind, but just remember, don't try to stop it with your mind. That's a paradox. It just has to stop naturally. And that takes some time. That's why Zen is so good for Western. And I'm not talking about Rinzai or Soto Zen. I'm talking about the Remember Zen that I wrote about. It's really ideal for Western mind, which Wei Ning also taught, is the Buddha nature within is already fundamentally pure. You don't have to sit yourself to emptiness or purify all your defilements of the body and the mind. Just sit again, chill out, enjoy nature, learn to just let it stop naturally. So walk with clear awareness. Just be aware of all the beauty of nature around you and learn that type of meditation. You'll go farther with that type of meditation than sitting in these rigid lotus positions that you see. Some of those are still important, but you don't have to do them all. You don't have to sit yourself to enlightenment. And that's what a lot of people did in the past. A lot of monks can be accused of doing this. They just sat and they tried too hard. Like, you can try too hard for enlightenment. It doesn't have to be this enormous journey of self-sacrifice and rigid practices. You don't have to sit around like a stone Buddha all day to reveal what's always been within you. You don't have to go to Tibet or India to reveal your Buddha nature. It's always been within you. It's always enlightened. It's just in the wrong position. You just have to reposition it and it'll come. So after I watched this eclipse and I knew my teaching was complete, I thought, well, maybe I should look back in the history and see if this is in Buddhism. Where else has this been found? And there's a document called the Kalachakra Tantra. And now Buddha gave this teaching to the first Kalki king of Shambhala. And Shambhala is also Shangri-La. I think the Hindus call it Sambhako. Now this is a lot of people think it's a mythical place. It's a real place. I don't know if it's in the inner earth, or if they just have a base on the inner earth or under the Himalayas, and that there's a second component off world and another planet potentially where Shambhala is. But after Buddha attained enlightenment, this first Kalki king, Suchandra, came to the surface and met with Buddha. He came with 90 rishis, so he came with 90 holy men. And Buddha gave him this separate teaching called the Kalachakra Tantra. And guess what, Rex? We've only got fragments of the Kalachakra Tantra. It's back to this suppressing of this information. It's by design. So we only have fragments of this Kalachakra Tantra. But Suchandra returned to Shambhala. He died 2 years later after he returned, but he remembered this whole teaching, wrote it down into the Kalachakra Tantra, returned to Shambhala, and they became an enlightened society. And in this Kalachakra Tantra is the mathematics for calculating the timing of eclipses. So why did Buddha go through the trouble of, or this first king of Shambhala, to try to figure out how to mathematically calculate eclipses? You know, they weren't using Stonehenge and these devices at this time. And another thing in the Kalachakra Tantra, that these Tantra practices, which had sexual component, were performed during lunar eclipses. Like, I'm not making this up. Anybody can go out and research this and you'll find just glimpses of it, but it's in there. And I know why it's in there. I know why they did this during eclipses, because I I know for a fact why they did that. And so it was in Buddhism. It was very clearly in Buddhism for a long time. And so they know that there's a thing called the Wesak festival in Buddhism, where they celebrate the birth, the enlightenment, and the death of Buddha all in one festival. And it's always on a full moon during, usually it's April, May, one of those 2 months, usually the Wesak festival follows on. Anybody that studies Buddhism will hear about Buddha attaining enlightenment under the Bodhi tree during a full moon. You know, this is important. He attained enlightenment under a Bodhi tree during a full moon. When he was almost dead, he completely gave up. He completely gave up on life, and bang, he became instantly enlightened. So that's where I keep telling you that it has to sink low below the very root chakra and reverse polarity before it can come up. That's what happened to Buddha. He was sitting during a lunar eclipse. You know, this part's not documented, but I'm just throwing it out there because I know that it was during a lunar eclipse. And that's kind of a hard thing to prove. And I don't really care to prove that, because I don't care. I'm just telling you that it occurred during a lunar eclipse. And that's why he gave that separate teaching to the first Kalki king. Now, people are going to start asking, well, why didn't he give it to everybody else? Why isn't the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path? Why isn't this teaching in there? And you got to remember, Buddha came in 500 BC, right when we were entering the Dark Age. It wasn't time. It's enlightenment can be a difficult time. Everybody who goes through enlightenment gets a slight attack for a while by archons or negative forces. It happened to Buddha. He had his dark night of the soul. It happened to Jesus. It happened to all these people. You go through a difficult time. It's very short in duration. And I think that's why monks don't openly teach this to a lot of their students. They want you to be around them, around other enlightened people, so the archon attack or negative attacks won't be as severe. And in the Dark Age was a way worse time to become enlightened than probably right now when we're in the early days of Dwapara Yuga. So I hope I'm not releasing this information too soon, because it was withheld. It's been withheld for a long 2,500 years since you people have got this full presentation like this and can truly understand the mechanics of enlightenment. It's known within Tibetan Buddhist sects, and I know these Kriya Yoga sects understand a lot of this too. They may not understand the importance of going low and flipping, and they don't have that fully in their techniques, but they know enough that there's a lot of enlightened. You'd be surprised how many enlightened Tibetan monks there are in these Kriya Yoga lineages. There's quite a few. There's more than most people would think.
Have you been over there?
To Tibet?
Uh-huh.
No, I've never been to Tibet in this incarnation, but I've been to Tibet.
Yeah, just, right on.
It's not last time. Yeah, that's a long, so we won't even get into that. So if you remember that model where I said we left the Sandus period in 2012, and that's what that 5,000 year calendar was really about, because it basically starts the same time Krishna departs. So we leave 2012 and bang, we get this weird tetrad coming up in 2014, 2015. Now all these so-called watchers got on there and saying this is a sign from God because these tetrads land on Jewish feast days and tabernacle days. I even wrote all these guys and said, all Jewish high holidays are on new moons and full moons, and they always have been. These tetrads aren't about some sign. Well, they kind of are, and you kind of see God when you see this. We come right out of the Sandus period, 2012, bang, we get this rare tetrad, which they don't happen very often, where they come bang, 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 4 in less than 24 months. We have 4 tetrads. And then we get this other strange thing where Jupiter passed through the belly of Virgo, which just happened this year. And then now, bang, we're getting this triad. We already had one just last week. We had a lunar eclipse just last week. That's why I was doing this presentation just weeks before that, to try to get some advanced students, go out and do your practices during lunar eclipse. That's very important to know this. So this is very rare to get a triad and a tetrad this close right after we come out of this 2012 cycle. And I know everybody got bummed out about 2012 because the shills took hold of it. They didn't understand what I've just taught you. They've just made, they could sell some books and sell some time on their YouTube channels or whatever, get lots of hits and tell you all this, and the end is coming and this is going to happen and blah, 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 blah. This is the time Think about it. We just we go full on into 50% mental virtue, and we get all these eclipses. It's for spiritual reasons. We're supposed to be becoming enlightened right now. That's what these are for. And I actually believe that there's people out there that have awoken during this time without even practicing. You know, Eckhart Tolle apparently he went to bed one night depressed, suicidal almost apparently, and he woke up the next morning enlightened. I've never talked to the guy, but I often wonder if there was an eclipse that night. And I'm pretty sure there was, because I think every single human being on this planet, unless it was Shakti-Pat or some esoteric tantra practice, become awakened during the lunar eclipse. And I'll tell you another thing about a lunar eclipse is we all hear about the moon matrix. You've heard that story where there's psychotropic technology on the moon that creates this sort of overlay matrix of our reality. Well, if you were going to put antennas on the moon to do that, you would power them by solar technology because you want them to last thousands of years, right? Because we've been kind of controlled for thousands of years. Guess what? The only time there's no sunlight reflecting off the moon is only during a total lunar eclipse. You see that? Like, can get the angle right here, but it's only during a lunar eclipse that there's no sunlight reflecting off the moon. So maybe the moon matrix goes down during that time. I think it's more plasma. All matter in the universe is charged plasma, even the moon, the earth, and the sun. And that when this is a local alignment, so this is way more powerful than the dual suns and the influences of the planets and the stars. This is very powerful when this occurs, and this affects these aura electricities that Shirikishwar identified. It affects the Buddha nature, and that's why the shift occurs when these things occur. Like, if anybody doesn't believe this, just keep trying it, and I'll guarantee you, if you're on the right path and doing the right technique, you're gonna attain Christ consciousness only during a lunar eclipse. That's a fact.
It's funny you're bringing this up because I remember out there in Idaho when I was for the total lunar eclipse last year. I had a chance to see it in Smith Ferry, and it was just awesome, man. That whole experience was incredible, and the vibes, you could definitely feel it.
You can feel them, yeah. That's one thing to do. It's just, if you don't believe this, just go out there and meditate, and you can actually feel a tugging on the top of your head. Like, they affect consciousness in a big way. And I used to think that it was the moon matrix, and why I don't think it may be the moon matrix in this plasma theory of mine. I put both of them in my book just for insurance. You throw them both out there and maybe one's right. Why I think it's plasma, because the Tibetans believe that universal energy is magnified 10,000 times during a solar eclipse. Now, you won't attain enlightenment during a solar eclipse. But the sunlight's still hitting the moon during a solar eclipse. And so what we really should be doing during solar eclipses is we should be sitting in circles, meditating, thinking about the golden age, thinking about a better world, and having positive thoughts. Now, if you don't believe that the other side, the dark side, know about this, just go do your own study and see how many wars and battles started during solar eclipses all the time. They know this, so they know that fear during the battle is magnified tremendously during a solar eclipse. So the other side knows this. You might think this is just astrology and pie in the sky type stuff. It's not. Your competitors know all of this, and it's about time we know it too, because we can. That's the time we should be having sit-in meditations, is during solar eclipses, and we should be meditating and doing our Kriya Yoga, whatever we do during lunar eclipses, because that's when, and Buddha even said this, he said, all Buddhas attain enlightenment at night. He said that. They don't attain enlightenment during the day when a solar eclipse, they attain enlightenment at night. And he just missed out the part about they attain enlightenment at night during solar or lunar eclipses. But he knew that. I know he knew that. I didn't meet him personally, but he knew that. It's in the Kalachakra Tantra. And so these lunar eclipses affect our soul. They affect these orbs inside us, these light orbs. And we understand solid, liquid, and gas, but we really don't understand the effects of plasma. And really, like I said, the earth and the sun and the moon are just charged plasma spheres. So when they're in direct alignment, they they affect the electric and magnetics properties that influence this inner orb or causal body. And it could also be when the moon matrix goes down, but I don't think so. And another one is, I showed you on that map before when Krishna and Rama came. Krishna and Rama were the same being. They were the same soul. It's the same, that's widely known. But there was another incarnation of Krishna, and this guy came in 1486, I think he passed. His name was Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. I can't believe I just pronounced that correctly, but he was another known incarnation of Krishna. And guess what, Rex? He incarnated on a night of a total lunar eclipse. The last incarnation of Krishna on this planet incarnated on the night of a total lunar eclipse. And anybody watching this is why I don't jump on the negative Trump wagon. President Trump incarnated on the night of a total lunar eclipse. Most people, I know you had a really good Vedic astrologer on your show, and she was doing his charts. They kind of, I don't know if did she bring that up about the lunar eclipse occurring? That's pretty significant. And I think it's a positive thing.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
I think him incarnating on a lunar eclipse is a positive thing. And I know a lot of people just think anybody who comes to power is part of the Illuminati and all this stuff, but America has a president who incarnated during a total lunar eclipse. The last incarnation of Krishna incarnated. I'm not saying that President Trump is Krishna, but I think that the matrix was down and he incarnated at that time, and that he could be a very important president of this time, of this generation. I don't think he's there by accident. I really don't. And he might be a bit crass for somebody and some people, and speaks his mind, but like that's just who he is, right? And I think there's something more behind that. I don't know for sure, but just time will tell, right? We'll all know.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So this kingdom of Shambhala that got this Kalachakra Tantra teaching from Buddha, they say they send representatives to the surface every 100 years. I think Woodrow Wilson was the last US president that apparently had a visit from a representative from Shambhala. And they say they watch over the currents of the world from Shambhala. And I believe it could have a celestial component. And the interesting thing is the last Kalki king, his name is Rudra Chakran. You've heard of the Kalki avatar. I don't know if your viewers have ever heard of the Kalki avatar. That's the guy in Hindu scripture that comes back at the end of the age. Probably when we reach this omega point that I talked about is probably when this guy comes. He rides out on a white horse, just like Revelations, at the end of the age to defeat the dark forces. And I think the Kalki king on this white horse is the same guy on the white horse in Revelations. And the exact same story, guy on the white horse. And people, well, why would a guy come out in a white horse? We got tanks and modern aircraft. I don't really know why. Maybe they have like super weapons that you can still ride a horse. Maybe there's so many sun flares at that point that, our electronics and cars and stuff just don't work anymore. I don't really know, but it's just interesting. And the guy on the white horse in Revelation, nobody knows his name. A lot of people try to say it's Jesus. I don't think it is, because if you go into John 14:15, it talks about this comforter that comes at the end of the age that teaches everybody all things. And it's clearly not Jesus, because Jesus says it's not me. It's somebody, the Father will send another. I think that this guy on the white horse in Hindu prophecy is the same guy on the white horse in Christian prophecy. But, we'll only know that with time as well.
April just said Trump is going to reign for 1,000 years. Thank you for that, April. And somebody else just said, wow, a Trump supporter in Canada, that's rare. Be careful.
I don't give a care what other people think, but yeah, it's the liberal side is just, anyway, that's another show.
Oh yeah.
Let's stick to enlightenment right now. So this Kalachakra astronomy, they carefully tracked on the moon. There's these nodal positions on the moon, and one's on the south and one's on the north. and they're called, you've heard this already with your astrologer, Ra-U and Ketu. You've heard that name, right? A lot of people think they're planets and a separate planet comes in, creates eclipse. It's not. These ancients were tracking these nodal points because the sun goes around the ecliptic and the moon comes in on a slightly different path. But whenever it's right in that north node or the south node, there's either going to be a lunar eclipse or a solar eclipse going to occur. And so here we go, 2,500 years ago, they're tracking these nodes very, very carefully in Vedic astrology and in Kalachakra astrology. It's very similar to Vedic. In fact, in Kalachakra astrology, they call it Ra-U and Caligni. So almost the same names. Their calendars are very, very, very similar. So these people were tracking these things for a reason. So I'm going to show you kind of the mechanics of enlightenment now. So we got the seven menorah, you know, the seven candlesticks on a menorah. It really, I think, represents the seven chakras.
Real quick, Sheldon, if I can.
Yep.
I forgot to do this at the beginning of the podcast, and I should have. I want to give a huge shout out to our sponsor. Ladies and gentlemen, definitely check out virtualshield.com/leak project. If you want to keep your information safe when you surf the web, if you want to keep your information anonymous from big data spies, just click the link virtualshield.com/leak project for less than $5 a month. They're even offering a 50% discount on some offers and also a 30-day free trial. I use it. It's awesome. Click the link, support our sponsors. And it's about the price of a coffee at a coffee shop. And I know a lot of you guys out there do a ton of research. So check it out, virtualshield.com/leak project. Shameless plug. And okay, Sheldon, back to you. Thank you.
No problem. So over here, we got man the brute, somebody who's stuck in the lower chakras. Their soul consciousness is down here. They're living a mind identified existence. That mind, sun mind, in this three balls on a rope, spinning, spinning, spinning. And the Buddha nature is never fully revealed. They're not living in spirit. They haven't kept their spirits up, like Jesus said. They haven't let the Kundalini rise up. And so these seven chakras are just like vortices, but it has to, this is the third eye of the pineal gland. Enlightenment really presents at the crown chakra, which is connected to the thalamus. And you see my value added here, I put a little lunar eclipse up here in the corner. So you got to do this. So watch this very carefully. This Buddha nature must sink low and then it goes up. That's the Kundalini rising. Must go low and rise up. That's getting hit by the diamond thunderbolt in Zen. It's got to go low and rise up. That's moksha, enlightenment. This is the mechanics of enlightenment. So why Kriya Yoga and some of these techniques are so important is you got to be able to move that consciousness through your chakra system without your mind involved. The mind has to be still. You can't do that with the mind. It has to be done at the soul level or at your Buddha nature. And then, so when that actually occurs and it goes to the crown, it expands out and creates that solar aura. So that's why there's those solar auras around Christian art, Vedic art to represent enlightenment. And you can see now you have an expanded consciousness. You have God consciousness. You're connected to everything now. And your bliss is perpetual. Your life will be nothing but, you can still have a bad day or get angry or whatever. People think enlightenment people are just a perfect state of perfection, and it's not really true. You can still get angry. The world can still pull you down a bit, but there's just this underlying perpetual bliss. It doesn't go away. And we're all supposed to be over here. We all have the ability to be this. This is what Jesus, everybody taught. You can't go into any Christian church and they're going to show you this right now. And there's a reason for that, I believe. You know, there's 3,000 or 30,000 different variants of Christianity. And even a lot of Buddhist sects, they wouldn't show you the mechanics of it. So when you understand the mechanics, what I'm trying to show you here, it's very important, because then you know why the technique is important, but more importantly, you know why the timing is also critical. So you could be a Kriya Yoga practitioner, Rex, that have been doing it for 20 years, and you're still not enlightened because you're missing all these lunar eclipses and not doing your practice during that time. Simple as that. like that makes a major difference to attaining full consciousness. So this cyclic meditation, where in Kriya Yoga, when you do the deep in breath, that consciousness rises up. So as you breathe in, over here, can you see this picture of the guy sitting here? So as you take the breath in, you let the consciousness rise up. And as you exhale, the consciousness falls back down. So when you're doing this cyclic technique all the time, you're moving this consciousness. You're preparing yourself for when an eclipse occurs. So Kriya Yoga and Vajrayana are really the two most important meditations techniques out there. You can use other ones like some of the other Buddhist meditation techniques just to slow the mind down. Some are dynamic meditations where you kind of run on the spot and you tire your physical body out, and the last 15 minutes is meditation. Find the meditations that work the best for you. But in the later stages, if you're not moving this energy or this life force through your central nervous system or your Shushanam region, you're not doing the right meditations to reach the final practice. And where Tantra comes in, and Tantra is really abused in the West because, you know, it does involve sex. So there's a lot of Westerners out there. Yeah, come to my ashram and we'll have sex and I'm gonna enlighten you, right? You know, man again, you know, it's pretty easy. You know, it's like
bingo.
It's abused. And within proper Tantra, like the Vajra teachings, you know, there's 9 inner and outer yanas that you perfect, and it can take years before you do the final practices. But what happens with Tantra is this Buddha nature. When you're with a master practitioner, they can help pull your nature down so the reset can occur. And if you read that stuff on the Kalachakra really carefully, in Shambhala, they did the Vajra practices during the lunar eclipses. So they were doing this sexual practice during the lunar eclipses. I think in the future, and I was going to write a book on this, to kind of teach loving partners how to do Tantra, so that 2 people in love or a husband and wife can go out and learn these techniques and do it. But it usually involves the other person was usually enlightened, that was helping somebody else become enlightened. It's just so, you got to be so careful with it in the West, because you go to California Tantra school and, you know, and 2 days later, somebody's going to want to have sex, who's probably not even enlightened, by the way. And so it's really has been abused in the West. Tantra is really misunderstood in the West. It's a much more deeper teaching. And if you're not studying the 9 inner and outer yanas, well, you're not really practicing Tantra. So if anybody goes away today with something, just always remember this: timing and technique are equally important. Lunar eclipses provide the optimal time to shift your Buddha nature. You must bring that mind to rest naturally, and that's where nature comes in. Walk in nature with awareness, crystal clear awareness, and you'll get to this stage a lot faster. It's also important to remember that Buddha nature must sink below that first chakra. So it's got to go below the root chakra. And that was the key that Wei Nang and Buddha left. They reached a low point in their life before they shifted their nature. And that's what we all have to do. And that's a very important technique. And you also have to flip it. So in your Kriya Yoga, you have to learn to flip your Buddha nature. You have to kind of imagine it sinking and going upside down for it to rise up suddenly to the crown chakra and this solar aura to form. Most people can't see solar auras, but you can kind of tell. I can tell if somebody's enlightened or not. And there's a lot of people on the internet that aren't, and that claiming they are. So you got to be kind of careful when you select a guru. So this is the part that gets interesting, is when I started researching all of this, I started realizing that we knew this way before Buddhism, Hinduism even. This goes back a long time. Our ancients knew this importance of timing and technique. So during a lunar eclipse, you let the Buddha nature sink below the crown chakra and it'll rise up. That's the Kundalini rising. That's getting hit by the diamond bolt, and you get that expanded consciousness then during a lunar eclipse. So it's very important to understand that. I hope that I'm driving that point home, because I think I've missed that a few times. So I believe all these ancient civilizations track these eclipses for spiritual purposes. I'm just going to let a dog out real quick. 1 second.
Okay, no problem. starting to say, hey, somebody wants out there. And you know, it's fascinating. I'm just going to talk here for a minute while you're letting the dog out. Who let the dogs out? Anyway, there was a picture that I saw recently via Kirlian photograph where a friend of mine, you could see all their chakras like perfectly. They were all the right balance, the right size. They went down the entire body. And the person said after she took the picture, she goes, "Do you meditate?" Because it was just that perfect. And then I looked at my chakras and like some of them were, you know, massive, but they weren't all like perfectly lined up the same way that hers were. So you could tell some parts were more than others. So people like, I used to be skeptical about the chakras. I'm like, well, how do you know that chakras are even real? And da-da-da. You can take pictures of them. And it's fascinating when you see a photograph of chakras and the energy and the auras and stuff like that. I'm in the process right now of looking where to find a camera system that I can hook up that will actually take Kirlian photographs. And it's very difficult to find the actual camera systems. I found a couple out there that don't even have prices. They're just like, call us. So I think that'd be pretty neat to take pictures of. And you've probably seen the leaves before where you cut a leaf in half. And before you cut it in half, you take a picture of it with the Kirlian photograph. Then you cut it in half. Then you take a picture with the camera, the Kirlian camera, and you'll see the entire leaf in the electric grid. It's incredible.
Yeah. Because they're in the subtle, like that, when that orb enters our body before birth, it's really what powers up the chakra system. So that's kind of an amazing thing. We have these amazing bodies that we inhabit, and it's not a parasitic connect. Like you don't have a person unless that orb goes in before birth, and it powers up all these etheric bodies and the chakra system, but they correlate with an organ. So our bodies are quite amazing things. And I know a lot of people saying our DNA is down and all that. Anybody watching this can attain enlightenment with the current DNA that you have. You do not need a DNA upgrade to attain enlightenment right now. This doesn't require DNA. I think our DNA is going to keep changing as these suns come together. That's part of the Yuga cycle, and we may even change dimensions. We may go to the fourth soon and then go to the fifth. Like I think there's potential for that to occur. And all these Jewish holidays were just on new moons and full moons because that's in their history. But maybe that's Hashem or God again saying, do your practices during these holy days. And they just lost the technique in some of the higher practices, but it falls on those days for a reason. You know, like a lot of this stuff's interconnected more than we could ever imagine. And when we go, the rest of this presentation is going to, I think, blow some people's minds when they see, because I'm going to show you how Stonehenge was used to predict eclipses. And
let me ask you this real quick, Sheldon. How long would you say? How much more time do we have? Because I'm wondering if we have enough time, I could break this down into two parts.
I don't know. I think I can finish in about 20 minutes.
About
maybe
20 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So that's great. Perfect. I was just thinking if you wanted to go a little bit longer than 20 minutes, then we could just take like a 5-10 minute break, and then people could, do what they need to do. We could all come back, but 20 minutes. Yeah. Let's just rock it out, man. Ladies and gentlemen, you don't have to go anywhere. This is incredible. And I'm reading through the comments here, and people are really enjoying this information, as am I. So thank you.
Okay. So Vedic astrology. Now I know you've had a good introduction to this, and it's more accurate than Western astrology. We won't tell anybody that. I'm going to get a whole bunch of Western astrologers pissed off at me, but they have the thing called the sidereal zodiac. And it's really basically this band around the earth. If you can imagine dividing it into 12 parts, it's just like Western astrology. It's divided in 12 parts. It's a little bit different. They're called rasis, and the measurement's different. So they wait till the constellation complete. So it's not in 12 equal pies, even though it's represented on charts and stuff, just for simplification purposes. They actually vary in size depending on when that constellation completes. It's more accurate because they see the stars fixed in the background against the planetary motion. So theirs incorporates the precession of the equinox from these dual suns. It's not the moon and the earth like they think. And the Caltech researchers kind of proved that there's something else out there that's doing this. And it's a brown dwarf, I think, and it's our dual sun. I never found the name that they gave this in the ancient. I tried to look through it, and they didn't really name the sun. So Planet X, Nibiru, whatever you want to call it. Now, another interesting thing about Vedic astronomy now, and this is where it gets really cool, is they have these nakshatras, and there's 27 of them, and the 28th one is hidden. And why there's 28 is because a lunar month is 28 days. So they break it down. They have the 12 parts, just like the Western, but they also go further. But this 28th is called Abhijita, and it's the king of the nakshatras, and it is a time of worship. And because they track these Rahu and Ketu nodal points, just like they did in the Kalachakra astronomy as well, I believe that there's more to this, and it just kind of gets lost in time, right? Like most Vedic astronomers won't tell you about this. But so they're monitoring these, they've divided this band into 12 parts, just like, so the sun's going around, well, the sun's not going around the earth, but it looks like this, right? It's going around, and they divided it into these 12 segments. But they also divided it into this, now that's the Vedic sidereal zodiac. But they've also have these lunar 27 or 28 lunar points. So if you look at the sidereal zodiac, you see these 12 points here, and further out you see the 27. Well, there's actually 28, right? Now, if you go to Nabata Playa in Egypt, this is the Stonehenge of Egypt, you can look at this and you can quickly see that this device can emulate what you see in the Vedic sidereal zodiac, right? Now, they say this is probably 2000 BC as well. And Stonehenge, they're saying is 4000 BC, way older than they originally thought it was. So this is Stonehenge here. And you can see this Vedic sidereal zodiac, how it can be used in Stonehenge. The only interesting thing with Stonehenge is it's got 56 holes, which is double 28. You take 56 is double 28. The reason there's 56 peg holes around Stonehenge is because then you get 99.8% accuracy when you predict eclipses, right? And over here, we have this thing called OMAC, which everybody thought was a medicine wheel. And there's lots of medicine wheels around North America that they would build them to honor a great chief or a great hunt or something like that. Well, this one in OMAC in Alberta, I'll tell you right now, is not a medicine wheel. This thing is amazing. And if you look at this site, this is OMAC from the sky down here in the bottom corner. You see these you'll see these 20, there's 28 spokes radiating out from the center of this device. And it's got like a heel stone, just like Stonehenge. And here's the real mind-blowing stuff, is that Stonehenge is located exactly on the 51st degree latitude. And it's only on 51 degree latitude that the midsummer sunrise and the midsummer sunset and the midsummer moonrise, midsummer moonset are exactly at 90 degree angle to each other. Exactly. So then you get a device that can predict all of these solstice and lunar eclipses and stuff very accurately. And this one OMAC out in Alberta is a bit more cruder. It doesn't have the nice megalithic structures, but it's got the 28 spokes, and it's a 5,000 plus or minus 200 year calendar. Like the Mayan calendar is a 5,100. Like, I think they were trying to track the same thing, and we just lost that within time. I know the main researcher that was saying they're just nerds. They were interested in this stuff. I'm telling you right now, these guys weren't nerds that were built these sites. These sites can represent the Vedic sidereal zodiac, and they can predict lunar eclipses for a reason. They predict them because the ancients knew that was the time to attain enlightenment. And but the other interesting thing about this one in Alberta, guess what, Rex? It's exactly on 51 degrees latitude, and the outer ring is the exact same diameter as Stonehenge. And these things are thousands of miles apart on different continents, and they both can be used for predicting eclipses, and they both can represent this Vedic sidereal zodiac very accurately. So these are arithmetic ground calculators, all these devices for predicting what's going on in the heavens. They were in astronomy, these guys weren't nerds just interested in astronomy. Whoever had these Vimanas, I believe, the blue skin guys, the good aliens we want to really be dealing with, who are teaching us higher consciousness, went around the world and built these sites, and they go back to 12,000 years. Göbekli Tepe is 12,000 years old. That was before the time of Rama. That was before, way before the time of Krishna, way before Buddhism or Hinduism or Christianity even was in somebody's imagination. This goes back a long time, and our ancients knew this. We knew this in the last golden age, and I think that's why Göbekli Tepe was buried. And so I drew this. This is Stonehenge from the top. So you're looking down at the top of Stonehenge, and it can accurately predict the midsummer moonrise and sunset, and it's exactly 90 degrees. And it has to be within 1 degree of 51 degrees parallel to get that 90 degrees. It's within 1/3 of 1 degree of the 51st latitude. And I don't know if the OMAC one is that close. You can build these sites in other places in the planet and they're still going to work, but you're not going to get that 90-degree accuracy that really it comes in kind of handy. I don't think it's by accident that these two sites that are thousands of miles away but can do the exact same thing are just made by nerds wanting to follow when eclipses are going to occur. And I'll show you exactly how Stonehenge works now. So you got to imagine that the center of this site is the Earth. That's the planet Earth. This is the sidereal zodiac. This is the whole thing. Now, on Stonehenge, a guy by the name of Odbury, he was like 1666. So there's a lot of shills trying to say that Stonehenge was made in the 50s.
The devil 666. Somebody just put that.
Yeah, I saw that when I first saw when he was looking at this, and he found that outside of the rings of stone, like this is where all the famous blocks are, but outside there he found these 56 holes, and they named them the Odbury holes. And it wasn't until much later a guy by the name of Gerald Hawkins came along and figured out how they can predict eclipses, and I'll show you how they did it. Is if you can imagine that this is the center of the Earth, and you start marking the position of where the sun is and where the moon is. So if you go out every day and move the moon marker 2 points, and every 13 days you go out and move the sun marker 2 points, that you can accurately predict when a lunar eclipse is going to happen within 99.8 degree accuracy. So you have to ask, how come 4,005, or this could even be 7,000 years old? Because we're digging up artifacts around these sites that could have come a lot later. And we know Göbekli Tepe is 12,000 years old. So how come so long in our past, we had devices that could predict lunar eclipses in advance? And the reason why is you can't just rush out on the night of eclipse. Look, the moon's going, let's go out there and start doing your spiritual. You got to be tired. You got to play the mind out so the mind's not there and it can stop during the eclipse. And then you can do that Kriya Yoga technique where you let the Buddha nature sink below the crown chakra, and bang, you're going to become enlightened. They knew this a long time ago, and it's only going to be a matter of time before you see this come into the sort of ancient aliens and all this, because they're all trying to figure this stuff out, and they don't know because none of those guys actually went out and experienced something during a lunar eclipse. So you don't make all the connections, right? You kind of see something happen here, but this thing can predict. Now, if you went back to OMAC, it would only be 98% accuracy because it's only got 28 holes around the outside. So whoever brought Vedic astronomy, astrology to this planet, it goes back a lot further than we think. This is before the time of Hinduism, even before Krishna. And it goes back to our last golden age. I believe in the time of Atlantis, there was astronomer priests that went all over this planet in the Vimanas. They built these sites or helped our ancestors build these sites, and they were built for spiritual purposes, all of them. I don't care what anybody says. They can try to debunk me all they want. These sites can predict eclipses, and there was a reason for it. Now we have this one, Göbekli Tepe, and it was built around 11,000, 12,000 BC. They don't know the exact, but they know it's old. And when I said it was buried by stones, you can see that the site's intact, but see how these stones are all laid out? This wasn't just from the winds of time or whatever. So they buried this site. Everybody that's researched this site, they buried it. Somebody buried it for some reason. And I think the animal engravings represent star constellations. And I believe it's most likely an astronomical calculator. And if you look up here, you see this little groove up here? See the little groove up there?
Uh-huh.
There's stones in the middle of this, and I think the sun was hitting that, and the shadow was reflecting on the center stone, so they could just use chalk to predict when these lunar eclipses were coming. This device can be used to predict eclipses, and I'm just putting this information out there. Future researchers, they can go out there and they'll figure this all out themselves. But these devices are very old, and they can predict lunar eclipses, and there's a reason for it.
I got to make a comment too about that, because there was a statue from Göbekli Tepe that I saw that was recently released, and it even brought back, it kind of triggered memories, and it as weird as that sounds, it looked like a giant mantis, and it was like it was holding a person, it was holding a child, and it was from Göbekli Tepe. Fascinating. So when you bring up the ET interface, I wonder if there was some influence by these possible mantis beings, not only these blue beings, but the mantis ones as well. It's fascinating.
It's possible, yeah. Because this goes back before Krishna or Rama, so like you said, this might not be the blue guys that did this one. It's much older, and you can see it was buried. Like, you look at those stones, this was buried. That's not the winds of time and pole shifts don't create that kind of stacking of stones. This site was buried. So it's likely been misread. I believe it's an astronomical device. It was carefully buried with these small stones. Maybe they buried it because they knew the sun was returning, the twin, because when this was made was right around the time this twin sun would have been here. Likely used by priests to predict eclipses and track constellations. And they could have used just chalk on the wall there on that center device to figure out when these alignments were occurring. And I really believe these sites need to be viewed with fresh eyes again. I think science has missed some things, and that might not be in my lifetime. I don't know. Like, maybe more people will get this information. That's why I'm doing this, is hopefully it seeds ideas, and people will take it further, right? And just figure out what these ancient sites were for. And this is the one in Alberta called Omak. And again, it's right on the same latitude as Stonehenge, the 51 degrees. So you get that exact 90 degrees, and you see these 28 rays radiating out. So they can do the same thing I just showed you how the Oddbury holes work, by just simply placing a stone for the sun and the moon on this, and you would still get 98% accuracy. With the 56 holes, which is double the 28 days, which is the lunar days, so it's not quite as accurate as Stonehenge, but close enough, right? You just need to start preparing a couple days before these things come in. And that's why these devices were built. And I think they built them also to with big megalithic structures, so they lasted through the winds of time. They could last thousands of years, and they knew that we would go through our dark age. We would have archons and negative influences, and as we came out of the dark age, people would start seeing what these sites were for and figure this out. That's what's happened. That's what I'm doing right now. And it's a 5,000-year sun temple. And so I phoned the researcher. His name was Gordon Freeman. This guy was brilliant. This guy's a genius. I could tell right away when I was talking to a genius. And he figured most of this out, but he hasn't figured out about the eclipses yet. And I tried to explain what they were for. And, when you start talking about blue guys showing up in Vimanas and stuff, a seasoned researcher, scientific academic, they're not going to really buy into that very easily, right? If he experienced the consciousness himself during an eclipse, he might understand it. But, these guys are very scientific in their head, and that's cool. But he really did figure out that it was a 5,000-year calendar, that it could mark the equinoxes and the phases, moon phases. It's right on 51 degrees north, the same as latitude as Stonehenge. It has those 28 rays. So this Vedic sidereal zodiac can be fully represented on this site out in the middle of Canadian prairies. It's a 5,000-year calendar. And it's right at that 90 degrees where you get that midsummer rise, midsummer set. So there's a reason for it. It's I think they went all over the globe to teach us this stuff. Now we also have these devices in Nabda Playa in the Egyptian desert. That's called the African Stonehenge. They found one in Scythian Armenia. There's also this one in, I think it's in France. They figure 7,500 years old. Nicholas and Helena Roerich found these sites in Mongolia and Tibet, and the monks at that time, because these guys were like 1930s, 1924, they were actually looking for Nicholas Roerich, it was said that he was taking a piece of the Chintamani stone back to Shambhala. He had a piece of this stone which they think was in the Ark of the Covenant, and he took it back to Shambhala. And I think that's a true story. And so they're in Mongolia and Tibet. We don't know how many of these sites have been buried. Now they found this other one called Superhenge in the UK that's way bigger than Stonehenge. And it's only at 2 kilometers away, because it's got to be within that 51-degree latitude to get that accuracy. And it's still buried under the ground, and it's bigger than Stonehenge. And they've also found Woodhenge. So they made wood devices, but these ones rotted out, right? They're gone now, and they just found where the placements were, but they found these all over the world. And then there was a lady, her name was Maria Reichik. It's a German name, I'm probably pronouncing it wrong, but she discovered the Nazca lines in Peru can predict eclipses. When they were built, there was a whole series of lunar and solar eclipses. So as we got later on in time, they sort of seemed to make these devices more crude. They weren't manufactured with megalithic stones, but these traces in the sand from Nazca lines, they're the path that the sun and the moon were following. So these Rahu and Ketu, they were tracking these nodal points in the sand. So they're more crude, but I think the same people that were helping us build them. And then we went into the dark age and we had nothing. We went quiet for the last sort of 2,000 plus years, where these devices didn't exist, or we weren't being taught this. And I think it's because we went through the dark age, and the good extraterrestrials probably don't really get involved with this, because it's our spiritual evolution too. Higher worlds would respect that. They would just pull back, and at some point, everybody's worried about first contact. I think we have to lift our consciousness first before we really get a true first contact. Like, we've kind of had first contact. Everybody's seen enough of these devices, but I think a lot of the things people are seeing are devices our own governments have made, but a lot of them are probably extraterrestrial, some negative, some positive. Like, it's the good, the bad, and the really bad's out there in the multiverse too. It's not just all good, and it's not just all bad. There's a little bit of everything in the multiverse. And these devices are all over the world. And this is a really interesting one. It's called the Antikythera mechanism, and they found it on a Greek shipwreck. It's 2,000 years old, this device. And if you look at the gearing ratio down here, look at the gears. This is an analog computer, 2,000 years old. And guess what they discovered? It can predict eclipses until infinity. This device was made to predict eclipses, found in a Greek shipwreck, 2,000 years old. A lot of people have been talking about this device, but if you got anything from this presentation, I think you know why these devices exist. Our ancients knew this. We knew this a long, long time ago, and it was just lost. It got lost in the dark age. That's what Shirikeshwar said about the Yuga cycle. We lost the real Yuga cycle, and we lost this 24,000 year Yuga cycle with this binary system because of the dark age. And the last thing the people who control this world want is for everybody to attain higher Christ consciousness, because then the world really starts changing. One enlightened person can enlighten 10 million other people. So the last thing they want is mass enlightenment and higher consciousness, and for us to rediscover our past, because this is in our past. And I think I'm right. Like, I don't want to be arrogant or anything, as I'm a humble person, but I think I'm right. I'm pretty sure what I've just taught you here is there's a reason for it. They built these sites for spiritual purposes. So they're all over the world. And I believe they were used by an advanced society of astronomical priests. And this is where the real Vedic astronomy is really came from. They're all over the globe. They're giant astronomical devices to track celestial events. They can accurately track eclipses for a purpose. I believe they're stone construction to preserve for future knowledge. I think the ancients wanted us to find these sites, and they knew some fool would come along someday and figure out what these things were really for. You know, it's and they did, like Gerald Hawkins figured out what Stonehenge was for a long time ago. I didn't figure out this thing about Stonehenge for eclipses. He did. I just went off his research, but I know why they were doing it. He didn't know why they were doing it. He just, you know, a lot of these guys just think they were nerds tracking this stuff, but they were all built for spiritual purposes. And this knowledge was lost and destroyed during the Kali Yuga. Like, we went through our dark age. We're coming out now. People are seeing this veil being lifted. We're seeing, you know, like what's happening in Hollywood. This stuff's getting exposed. You're gonna keep seeing this veil being lifted. And I think what you're doing, Rex, is really, really important, because you're helping the veil get lifted. You're interviewing people like me and other people that are starting to slowly lift this, and that's what really is going to raise consciousness, is by getting this information out. And so
it's exciting, man.
What's that?
I said it's exciting.
So there's only like 2 more slides. So the top 3 things that anybody needs to take from this presentation, and the things you need to perfect to attain enlightenment, is practice the best techniques. That's where that Kriya Yoga, and that where you're moving that life force. I've got a slightly modified the one that I remembered, just I don't know where it came from. I just remembered it. It's similar to Kriya Yoga, but I think it would work better. And I'm probably going to write a book or do something to share that with people. I was a bit reluctant, because I often wonder, why didn't Buddha openly teach this? And I think he didn't, because we were entering the dark age. I know that we're out of the dark age now, so maybe it is time. And I had a near-death experience, and I was told to come back and teach this. So that's fairly big thing to have happen in your life. And so I don't think I would have got that message if I wasn't supposed to do that. And know the importance of timing now. So technique is not just the most important thing. Timing is also important. And that's why all these ancient devices were built around the world. And the number 3 thing is cultivate crystal clear awareness in nature. So less sitting. Don't sit around like a stone Buddha for 20 years and think that's going to attain enlightenment. Less sitting and more awareness in nature. So I've put a bunch of pictures of my farm here. This is all where I live. This farm, this nature that you see in these pictures below, had more to do with me changing consciousness than probably the technique, maybe even the timing. Nature. I spent thousands of hours in this vineyard up behind here, just sitting there kind of zenned out, doing really repetitive work. And the birds were singing, the sun was shining, I could smell the fresh air and the flowers. And nature is so crucial to changing your consciousness. You need to be connected to nature again. You need to grow a garden. You need to have flowers in your house. You need to have flower gardens. I know that sounds a little bit limp-wristed for some guys, but you know, you need to do these things. Grow a garden. Spend time in the parks, walk around with clear awareness where your mind's not in the way. You're just walking, hearing the birds sing, seeing the sun, seeing the trees, smelling the breathe in deep. Deep breathing is important, because prana, the chi force, the life force, is in nature. That's what your soul needs. Nature, nature, nature. Very, very important. This is my last slide. Find a guru that'll transform you. Sometimes people still need a guru. There's a lot of fake ones out there. I've just, a lot of these people have passed. Like this is Khyentse Rinpoche. He's a famous, look at that face. That man was so enlightened. If you had teachings from this man here, it was like sitting right at the feet of Shakyamuni Buddha. No difference. This is an Avhut. Buddha was an avatar that descended from someplace higher. This is a classic example of an Advhut. When they both attain Bodhi, there's no difference anymore. And we all have that potential. We all have the potential to attain Bodhi. This guy is a 6th Karmapa. Look at that face. He's the 15th Karmapa. Is he 15th or 4th? I think he's the 15th in this. They've already found his reincarnation. This guy Gurnath, he belongs to the Kriya Yoga sect that really brought the Kriya Yoga Babaji to the world. This guy lives like this guy. You can go. He comes to North America every year. This is another Kriya Yoga master. This is Muji. I don't even know this guy or this guy's teaching. I can just see it in their face. These men are enlightened. If you go sit beside any one of these men, you're in good hands. And look at this guy. I keep forgetting his name. I wrote it down. this guy's amazing. Sri Ravi Shankar. Again, I don't know what this guy teaches. He could be teaching green eggs and ham for all I know, but just look at the face. This guy's enlightened. There's and Satguru, Eckhart Tolle, more contemporary, but he's helped lift consciousness a lot. The thing about, I've never read his books, but I don't think he has a complete teaching though. I think he was one of these what I call accidentals. He went to bed and woke up the next morning enlightened. So he's got elements of what it was, like the power of now, living in the now, but he's probably not like some of these Kriya Yoga masters that really can take you all the way. I don't think he has a complete teaching yet. But go sit beside him, listen to him. You'll still feel his energy, and he's really helped lift consciousness in North America, probably more so than all of these other people combined in some ways. So they're out there. Remember, a teacher will only teach you something you don't know. A guru will transform you. There is a difference. So if you're stuck on your path, go out and seek one of these guys. Some of them are dead already, or no, not dead, they're just passed. But unfortunately, most of them are still in India, or they're Tibetans or stuff like that. And you can see in their faces, this is a wall full of enlightened people. And this lady here, Ananda May, she was a woman, and look at her glowing face. She's quite young there. This is an enlightened woman as well. I'd like to see more women on this wall. I just kind of gleaned over what's out there and built it based on people I can see that are enlightened. Some people can't see it, but they stand out like sore thumbs to me. These people were all enlightened, every single one of them.
Ladies and gentlemen, would you just look at it? Would you just look at it? That, as Sheldon would say, is enlightenment right there. That's awesome, Sheldon. Thank you so much, man. I really appreciate it. And yeah, I mean, I can pick up some good vibes from that as well. And what's fascinating is when you bring up these ancient texts and the duality, etc., the parallels that are found throughout various scriptures, if you know how to look for it. Like, for example, the Bible is there's so much information that's encoded in there that's symbolic, that it's almost like they put that in there for people that are initiated in certain mystery schools, oftentimes, to be able to pick up on, where it's information that's hiding in plain sight. And I think that you broke things down so well. And then also the possibility of the binary star being planet 9. That really has me thinking. And the Christ Consciousness, this is incredible. I can't wait to get a copy of your book. I certainly hope that it's going to be autographed from you, Sheldon. And folks, definitely go to Amazon, click the link for Amazon. You do have access to his work via digital. And do you have any hard copies, or is it all digital?
You can get hard copy or digital. They're both available from Amazon. The hard copy is more expensive, but it's a kind of book. It's kind of, you might read it 15 times in your lifetime. It's got a lot of information, and it's kind of encoded too. Like if you're really on the final stages of your path, it's probably one of those books you probably should get.
Absolutely. I can't wait to get mine. And folks, also, there's been a lot of people asking me, do you have any of those tinfoil hats left? There's a few of these left. This one right here is a batch of like 33 that have been signed and numbered for authenticity. But they're also, and there's like a 2-piece system, because there's these liners that are. Can we turn off the screen for just a second? I want to share something with you guys real quick. I think it's pretty cool. Okay. Awesome. Okay. We just look at it. So, I mean, as you can see right here, there's going to be liners that are being completed right now by Julian. He's handcrafting these things just perfectly. Almost perfect, as close to perfect as it gets. It looks perfect to me. But they're going to be like these liners that go inside, and there's 2 different types of fabrics. There's going to be one that protects up to 3 gigahertz, and then one that protects up to 30 gigahertz. And, saying protecting, shielding, etc. I've tested my phone with it. I wrapped my phone with it. I put the EMF detector on it. And what I noticed was substantial. I also showed Julian. He noticed a substantial difference also. But if you guys are interested in getting one of these, there's a few of them left. I've got a link that I'll leave in the video description box, also here in the chat. And what it will do for you is give you an opportunity to. We're on auction. It's number 6 right now. So if you want to make a bid, it's auctioned for a few more days. It's number 6 of 33. And I want to thank everybody that's also purchased one of these, and the very, very, very generous contributions. Somebody actually bidded Litecoins. And wow, I mean, holy cow, I never would have thought it. You guys are amazing. Thank you so much. And be excellent to each other, ladies and gentlemen. Make sure to get the book. Also, thank you, Sheldon. This was awesome. I hope I can have you on again sometime.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Oh,
I
yeah.
really appreciate it.
It was an honor. It was an absolute honor. Thank you so much. Be excellent to each other, ladies and gentlemen, like Bill and Ted. Let's save the world. Be excellent to each other and be the change you want to see. And also, we just look at it.